A millionaire abandoned his wife for infertility, returning years later to find her raising triplets without him. Welcome, my beloved story readers, to Mr. Peter Stories. Merry Christmas to everyone. How are you spending your Christmas holidays? Are you new here, or are you already one of our beautiful family members? Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you never miss an adventure. Now, let's get started. The autumn breeze whispered through the tree-lined streets of Westbrook, carrying with it the promise of change. Golden leaves danced across the polished windows of Millionaire jewelers, nature's confetti celebrating an occasion yet unknown. Inside, Oif Jenkins stood before the premier display window, her skilled hands moving with practiced precision as she arranged a collection of rare diamonds that caught and scattered light like fallen stars. At 28, Oif had already made a name for herself in the luxury jewelry industry. Her natural eye for detail and deep understanding of gemology had earned her the position of lead curator at one of the city's most prestigious boutiques. Her colleagues often joked that she could tell a diamond's origin story just by looking at it. But Awifa knew better. Every precious stone had secrets, just like people. The morning light filtered through the antique glass windows, casting prismatic patterns across her dark skin, making her appear as if she too had been dusted with diamond powder. Her corkscrew curls were pulled back in a professional updo, revealing elegant cheekbones and eyes that held the same warmth as honey caught in sunlight. She wore a tailored charcoal pencil skirt and cream silk blouse, simple yet sophisticated, allowing the jewelry she wore for display to take center stage. "The Midnight Aurora collection needs to be perfect," she murmured to herself, adjusting a particularly stunning pear-shaped diamond necklace. The piece was worth more than she made in 5 years, but in her hands it was treated with the reverence of a religious artifact. This collection would attract the city's elite, and as the newest addition to Lumineux's curatorial team, she needed everything to be flawless. The soft chime of the boutique's door barely registered as she focused on her task. The security guard's subtle shift in posture, however, caught her peripheral attention. Whoever had entered was important enough to warrant heightened awareness. "Mr. Goldsmith, welcome to Millionaire," came the manager's voice, dripping with the kind of deference reserved for royalty or the exceptionally wealthy. In Westbrook, Rowan Goldsmith qualified as both. Aoif's hands stilled on the diamond necklace. Everyone knew the Goldsmith name. It was impossible not to in a city where their influence touched everything from real estate to resources. Rowan Goldsmith had transformed his family's modest mining operation into a global empire, earning himself the moniker King Midas in business circles. At 34, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, known as much for his business acumen as for his striking looks and bachelor status. She didn't turn around immediately, instead using the window's reflection to catch a glimpse of the man whose face regularly graced business magazines. The reality proved more compelling than any photograph. Rowan Goldsmith stood 6'2", his presence commanding the space without effort. A bespoke charcoal suit emphasized broad shoulders and an athletic frame. Clearly, he was a man who made time for the gym despite running an empire. His hair was a rich golden brown, styled in that perfectly imperfect way that suggested both confidence and careful attention to detail. But it was his face that caught and held attention. Strong jawline, aristocratic nose, and eyes the color of aged whiskey. "I'm looking for something special," his voice carried across the showroom, a rich baritone that seemed to resonate in the chest rather than the ears. "The Midnight Aurora collection, I believe?" This was Aoif's cue to turn and assist, but years of training in poise and professional presentation couldn't quite prepare her for the moment his eyes met hers. The air between them seemed to crackle with an energy that defied explanation, like the charge before lightning strikes. "You're in luck, Mr. Goldsmith," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "I've just finished arranging the collection for display. Would you like to see the pieces up close?" His eyes widened slightly, surprise, appreciation, before his lips curved into a smile that transformed his entire face from merely handsome to devastating. "I would indeed, Miss Jenkins. Alweef Jenkins." She extended her hand, professional courtesy warring with the electric awareness that shot through her arm when he took it. His grip was warm and firm, lingering a fraction longer than strictly necessary. "Alweef," he repeated, pronouncing her name perfectly on the first try, a rarity that didn't go unnoticed. An Irish name for a woman who clearly knows her diamonds. "I'm intrigued already." The manager hovered nearby, clearly anxious about leaving his most important client in the hands of his newest curator, but Rowan waved him off with the casual authority of someone used to getting his way. "I believe I'm in capable hands." Oif led him to the private viewing room, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The space was designed to feel intimate while maintaining professional distance. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, and acoustic panels that ensured privacy. As she began to present the collection, she found herself sharing not just the technical specifications, but the stories behind each piece. "This particular necklace," she explained, lifting a cascade of diamonds that caught the light like captured constellations, "was inspired by the aurora borealis. The way the stones are set creates a fluid movement, mimicking the dance of the northern lights." "You speak about them as if they're alive," Rowan observed, his eyes following her hands as she demonstrated how the piece moved. "Most people see dollars and carats. You see poetry." "Everything valuable has a story," she replied, meeting his gaze. "The best ones are still being written." Something shifted in his expression, interest deepening into fascination. "I came here looking for an anniversary gift for my mother," he said, his voice taking on a different quality. "But I suspect I've found something far more precious than jewelry." The line should have sounded rehearsed, perhaps even trite, but the intensity in his eyes gave it weight. A wife felt her professional mask slip slightly, allowing a genuine smile to break through. "Mr. Goldsmith—" "Rowan," he interrupted gently. "Please." "Rowan," she amended. "Are you always this forward with jewelry consultants?" "Only the ones who see poetry and diamonds and have names from Irish folklore," he countered, then added with disarming honesty, "Actually, I've never been this forward with anyone. There's something about you, Aoife Jenkins, something real in a world that often feels artificial." She should have maintained professional distance, should have steered the conversation back to the collection. Instead, she found herself asking, "And what do you plan to do about that?" His smile turned contemplative. "Would you have dinner with me? Tonight? I know a place that serves authentic Irish cuisine, a nod to your name, unless you'd prefer something else?" The rational part of her brain listed all the reasons this was a bad idea. He was a client, vastly wealthy, probably used to women falling at his feet, but there was something in the way he looked at her, not as a conquest or an acquisition, but as someone he genuinely wanted to know. "I don't usually mix business with pleasure," she said carefully. "Neither do I," he replied, "but some rules are worth breaking for the right reason." A moment passed between them, heavy with possibility. Then Aoife made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. "I get off work at 7. I'll have a car waiting," he said, then gestured to the necklace she still held. "And I'll take that piece as well. My mother will love it, though I suspect it won't be the most valuable thing I found at Lumineux today." As she prepared the paperwork for the sale, Oaf couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped onto a path that would lead her places she'd never imagined. Looking at Rowan's reflection in the glass cases, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Part admiration, part determination, and something else, something that looked remarkably like destiny. The autumn breeze outside had picked up, sending more golden leaves swirling past the windows. Nature's confetti, she thought again, but this time it felt less like random celebration and more like applause for a beginning. The same breeze that had whispered of change that morning now seemed to sing of it, as if the very air knew that in this moment, in this pristine jewelry boutique, something extraordinary had begun. What neither of them could know, as they stood surrounded by some of the most precious stones in the world, was that their own story would prove far more valuable than any diamond. That their meeting, seemingly chance, but perhaps guided by something greater than coincidence, would spark a tale of love, loss, betrayal, and redemption that would become legendary in Westbrook's social circles. For now, though, there was just this: a powerful man who had found something he wasn't looking for, a woman who saw poetry in precious stones and the promise of dinner under an autumn sky. The first page of their story was being written, and like the finest diamonds, it would take pressure, time, and courage to reveal its true brilliance. In years to come, when asked about their first meeting, they would both remember different details. He would recall the exact shade of her honey-brown eyes. She would remember the way his smile transformed his entire face. But they would agree on one thing: that on an ordinary Tuesday in autumn, surrounded by diamonds that had taken millions of years to form, their lives had changed in the space of a single heartbeat. The security guard, who had witnessed countless wealthy customers come and go, would later say he knew something was different that day. Not because of who Rowan Goldsmith was, but because of the way one of the most powerful men in the city looked at Aoife Jenkins, like a man who had spent his life searching for diamonds and found something infinitely more precious instead. As Rowan left the boutique, both of them knew that the next chapter of their lives was about to begin. Neither could have predicted how that chapter would end or the many twists and turns their story would take. But in that moment, standing among the world's most precious stones, they had found something far more rare, a connection that defied explanation and a beginning that felt like destiny. The autumn day continued outside, golden leaves dancing in the breeze, while inside Lumineux Jewelers, our wife returned to arranging displays with slightly trembling hands and a heart full of possibilities. In his car, Rowan found himself already planning not just dinner, but a future he hadn't known he wanted, until he walked into a jewelry store on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories have the simplest beginnings. This one started with diamonds, destiny, and an autumn breeze that carried the whisper of change through the streets of Westbrook. What followed would become a tale of love so powerful it would survive betrayal, separation, and the weight of unspoken truths. But that was all yet to come. For now, there was just the promise of dinner and the beginning of something that felt remarkably like fate. Chapter 2. Whirlwind Romance. The Irish restaurant Rowan had chosen was tucked away in a historic building on the city's west side, far from the gleaming skyscrapers and modern attractions that dominated Westbrook's skyline. Aoife stepped out of the sleek black Mercedes he'd sent, her emerald green dress catching the warm light spilling from the restaurant's stained glass windows. The driver, who'd introduced himself as Harrison, gave her a knowing smile as he opened the door. She would later learn he'd worked for the Goldsmith family for 20 years and had never seen Rowan quite so particular about a dinner arrangement. Inside, the restaurant was a study in old-world charm, exposed brick walls adorned with vintage photographs of Dublin, weathered wooden beams crossing the ceiling, and the soft sounds of traditional Irish music weaving through the ambient chatter. Rowan was already there, standing as she approached, his business suit exchanged for a casual blazer that somehow made him look even more striking. "You look breathtaking," he said simply, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance with unconcealed appreciation. The maitre d' led them to a private alcove where a bottle of vintage wine already waited. "I have a confession," Rowan said as he pulled out her chair. "I've had my assistant researching Irish cuisine all afternoon. I wanted to impress you, but I realize now that might have been presumptuous. For all I know, you prefer Thai food." Aoife laughed, charmed by his honesty. "Actually, my mother was from Dublin. She would have appreciated the gesture." She watched as relief softened his features. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious why the mighty Rowan Goldsmith feels the need to impress anyone. Because from the moment you started talking about diamonds like they were stars fallen to earth, I knew you weren't impressed by wealth or status," he replied, pouring her wine. "And that made me want to find other ways to catch your attention." That first dinner set the tone for their courtship, unexpectedly genuine, filled with conversation that flowed as smoothly as the wine. They discovered shared passions for art, travel, and the stories behind beautiful things. Rowan spoke about learning the mining business from the ground up, spending summers in dusty quarries while his peers vacationed on yachts. Aoife shared stories about growing up in a family that appreciated beauty but couldn't afford it, which led her to study gemology, wanting to understand what made precious things precious. "It's not just about molecular structure or market value," she explained, gesturing with her wineglass. "Every truly valuable thing has a story. The hope it represented, the journey it took, the lives it touched along the way." "Like people," Rowan observed, watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "The most valuable ones come with the best stories." As they finished their meal, neither wanted the evening to end. Rowan suggested a walk through the nearby historical district, where gas lamps cast romantic shadows on cobblestone streets. Under the autumn moon, he told her about his dreams for expanding his company's ethical mining practices, while she shared her vision for making fine jewelry more accessible to everyday people. "You're different," he said suddenly, stopping beneath a lamppost. "I've dated women who saw me as a business opportunity, women who wanted the lifestyle, even women who thought they could fix whatever they imagined was broken in me. But you just see me." "And what do I see?" our wife asked softly. "A man who's trying to build something meaningful," he replied, stepping closer. "A man who, until today, didn't realize how lonely success could be." Their first kiss happened there, under the gaslights, with autumn leaves swirling around them like nature's confetti, once again celebrating their connection. It was tender, questioning at first, then deepening into something that felt like coming home to a place neither knew they'd been looking for. That kiss marked the beginning of a courtship that would become legendary in Westbrook's social circles. Rowan pursued Oif with an intensity that took her breath away, but always with a thoughtfulness that showed he valued her independence as much as her company. Their second date was a surprise trip to a private art gallery after hours, where Rowan had arranged for an expert to discuss the parallels between art and gemology. Their third was a helicopter ride to a coastal vineyard, where they spent the afternoon learning about wine pairings and watching the sunset over the ocean. But it was their casual moments that truly cemented their connection. Late-night phone calls, discussing their days, impromptu lunch meetings where they'd lose track of time, quiet evenings when Rowan would visit Millionaire just to watch Aoife work with the diamonds she loved so much. "You've ruined me for other jewelry stores," he told her one evening, as she showed him a particularly rare pink diamond. "Nobody else makes them come alive like you do." The society pages soon caught wind of their romance. "Mining mogul finds his diamond," read one headline, accompanied by a photo of them at a charity gala. Aoife had been hesitant about attending such a public event, but Rowan made it clear he wanted the world to know how he felt about her. "Let them talk," he said, leading her onto the dance floor. "They're just jealous they didn't find you first." The whispers and speculation only intensified their desire to create a private world of their own. Rowan bought a yacht and named it Destiny's Dance, a reference to their first conversation about the Northern Lights. They spent weekends exploring hidden coves along the coast, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories one detail at a time. One memorable evening, he arranged for a private dining experience on the yacht's deck. The chef prepared dishes from around the world, each course representing a place they dreamed of visiting together. As they finished dessert, Irish chocolate cake, a nod to their first date, Rowan presented her with a small box. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, noting her wide-eyed expression. "Not yet, anyway. Open it." Inside was a delicate rose-gold compass pendant, custom-designed, with tiny diamonds marking the cardinal points. "Because you've become my true north," he explained, fastening it around her neck. "No matter where business takes me, you're the direction I want to follow home." Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Rowan's business empire demanded much of his time, while Aoife was determined to maintain her independence and career despite his wealth. They learned to navigate these waters together, finding strength in their differences rather than letting them become obstacles. 3 months into their relationship, Rowan had to travel to South Africa for an important mining negotiation. The night before he left, he took Aoife to their special spot in the historical district, right under the lamppost where they'd first kissed. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he confessed, holding her close. "The thought of being away from you for even a week feels impossible." "Then don't stay away," she replied simply. "Take me with you." That spontaneous decision led to their first international trip together. Aoife took leave from Millionaire, and they spent 2 weeks exploring South Africa between Rowan's business meetings. He showed her the mines where his company's diamonds originated, and she helped him negotiate better conditions for the local workers, her expertise in gemology proving invaluable. It was during this trip that both privately realized they were falling in love, though neither said the words yet. They were standing at the edge of a diamond mine at sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, when Rowan pulled her into his arms. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I believe in making our own destiny," she replied, turning to face him. "But I also believe some things are written in the stars, like a jewelry curator and a mining mogul." "Like two people who see the world the same way," she corrected, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Back in Westbrook, their relationship continued to blossom. Rowan began leaving little surprises for Aoife, rare gems for her collection, books about places they planned to visit, handwritten notes expressing thoughts he found difficult to say aloud. She, in turn, showed him how to find beauty in simple moments. Morning coffee on her tiny apartment balcony, impromptu dance parties in his kitchen, quiet evenings spent planning their future. 6 months into their relationship, during a weekend sailing trip, they encountered a sudden storm. As the yacht rocked in the choppy waters, Rowan watched Aoife help his crew secure the deck without a trace of fear. "Marry me!" he blurted out, rain soaking them both. Aoife laughed, pushing wet hair from her face. "Is that an official proposal?" "No," he admitted, pulling her close. "When I propose, it'll be perfect. But I wanted you to know that's where we're heading. I want forever with you, Aoife Jenkins." The following months were filled with increasing certainty that they were meant to be together. They began looking at houses, though Aoife insisted on maintaining her apartment. "Not because I don't want to live with you," she explained, "but because I want to choose it, not have circumstances force it." Rowan's mother, initially skeptical of their relationship, was won over by Aoife's genuine nature and intelligence. During a family dinner, she pulled her son aside. "She's the one," she said simply. "Don't let anything come between you." Their friends marveled at how they balanced each other. Rowan's intensity was softened by Awif's warmth, while her pragmatic nature was enhanced by his drive to dream bigger. They worked as a team, supporting each other's goals while building shared dreams. 1 year after their first meeting, Rowan took Awif back to Millionaire jewelers after hours. He had arranged for the entire store to be filled with white roses, and in the display window where they'd first met, he'd placed a single perfect diamond ring. "You once told me everything valuable has a story," he said, leading her to the window. "I want our story to be the most valuable one either of us ever tells." Dropping to one knee, he continued, "You saw poetry in diamonds that first day, but you helped me see poetry in life. Marry me, Awif Jenkins, and let's write the rest of our story together." The ring he'd chosen was unusual. A rare blue diamond surrounded by smaller white stones, set in a pattern that mimicked the northern lights. It was a piece that told their story, the diamonds that brought them together, the aurora that inspired their first real conversation, and the unique love they'd built. "Yes," she whispered, tears sparkling in her eyes, 1,000 times yes. As they celebrated with champagne in the private viewing room where they'd first connected, neither could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. But in that moment, surrounded by diamonds and roses, their love felt unshakable. The autumn breeze outside had turned to winter wind, but inside, their hearts were warm with the promise of forever. They had no way of knowing that their greatest tests were yet to come, that their love would be challenged in ways they couldn't imagine. For now there was just this, two people who had found each other among all the precious things in the world, ready to begin their greatest adventure together. Their engagement made headlines across the city, but they barely noticed. They were too busy planning their future, dreaming of the family they would build, the places they would go, the life they would share. In the quiet moments between celebrations and planning, they would often return to their special spot in the historical district, standing under the lamppost where they first kissed, marveling at how far they'd come and how far they still wanted to go together. "I love you," Rowan would whisper against her hair, holding her close. "More than all the diamonds in the world." And Awif would smile, knowing that what they had was rarer than any gem, more precious than any stone. They had found a love that was both passionate and tender, exciting and comfortable, challenging and supporting. They had found home in each other's arms, and nothing, they believed, could ever change that. If only they had known what trials awaited them, perhaps they would have held each other closer, loved each other harder, said the important things sooner. But such is the nature of love. It makes us believe in forever, even when forever has other plans. Chapter 3. The Golden Wedding. The Cathedral of St. Michael rose against the early morning sky like a dream carved in stone, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven as if trying to touch the clouds. Dawn's first light filtered through the ancient stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the marble floors where, in a few hours, Awif Jenkins would walk to meet her destiny. In the bridal suite, a converted chapel within the cathedral's east wing, Awifa stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of design, created by a renowned French couturier who had spent 6 months bringing her vision to life. The bodice was adorned with thousands of tiny diamonds, each one personally selected by Awifa from Rowan's mines, sewn into intricate patterns that mimicked constellations. Golden thread woven throughout the fabric caught the light with every movement, making her appear to glow from within. "You look like a queen," her mother whispered, adjusting the cathedral-length veil with trembling hands. The delicate lace had been handcrafted by artisans in Venice, each motif telling a part of their love story. Tiny roses for their first kiss in the historical district, compass points for the pendant Rowan had given her, and aurora patterns that reminded them of their beginning. "I feel like I'm dreaming," Eowulf replied, touching the blue diamond engagement ring that had barely left her finger since Rowan's proposal. Like I might wake up back in my old apartment and none of this will be real. Her mother smiled knowingly. Love like yours doesn't need all this grandeur to be real, though I must admit, the grandeur doesn't hurt. The wedding preparations had consumed the past year, making headlines across the country. Rowan had spared no expense, wanting to give Eowulf the fairy tale she deserved, though she had often reminded him that she would have been just as happy with a simple ceremony. "Let me give you the world," he'd said, kissing away her protests. "You've already given me everything I never knew I needed." Outside the bridal suite, the cathedral and surrounding grounds had been transformed into a wonderland. Famous florists from Amsterdam had created installations using rare golden roses, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from specially constructed pavilions in the cathedral gardens, where the reception would take place. A string quartet practiced softly in the distance, their music drifting through the morning air like a gentle reminder that magic was real. In another wing of the cathedral, Rowan stood at a window overlooking the arriving guests, his best man watching him with amusement. "Never thought I'd see the day," James commented, adjusting his friend's bow tie. The great Rowan goldsmith nervous as a schoolboy. "I'm not nervous," Rowan protested, though his hands wouldn't stop fidgeting with his cufflinks, custom-made pieces featuring tiny compasses, a tribute to his first gift to our wife. "I'm overwhelmed, in the best possible way." The guest list read like a who's who of international society, business moguls, political leaders, royalty from small European countries. But neither bride nor groom cared much about the social implications of their union. They had invited the world to witness their love, but the only people who truly mattered were already in their hearts. As the morning progressed, more guests arrived, filling the cathedral's ancient pews. The media circus outside was kept at bay by discreet security, though photographs would later capture the parade of luxury vehicles and famous faces. Society columnists would spend weeks writing about the event, calling it the wedding of the century, but they would miss the small, intimate moments that made the day truly special. They wouldn't write about how Rowan had sneaked a handwritten note to our wife's room that morning, telling her that among all the precious stones he'd discovered in his life, she was the rarest gem of all. They wouldn't know about the tiny Irish blessing sewn into the hem of her dress, a tribute to her heritage, or the piece of his father's old mining jacket sewn into Rowan's tuxedo, close to his heart. As the ceremony approached, the cathedral filled with music, not the traditional wedding march, but a piece specially composed for them, weaving together Irish melodies with contemporary harmonies. The flowers that lined the aisle were arranged to gradually shift from pure white to the softest gold, creating an ombre effect that drew the eye inevitably toward the altar. Rowan took his place at the front of the cathedral, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. The massive doors at the far end opened, and the congregation rose as one. Later, he would try to describe the moment he first saw Eowulf in her wedding dress, but words would fail him. How could language capture the way his heart seemed to stop and race at the same time? How could he explain that in that moment, surrounded by more wealth and luxury than most people would see in a lifetime, all he could see was her? Wife floated down the aisle on her father's arm, each step bringing her closer to her future. The diamonds in her dress caught the light from the stained glass windows, creating tiny rainbows that danced around her. But it was her smile, radiant and real, that brought tears to Rowan's eyes. Their vows were both traditional and personal, carefully crafted to honor their unique journey. Rowan spoke of transformation, how finding Eowulf had changed him from a man who collected precious things to one who understood true value. Eowulf promised to be his true north, his partner in all adventures, his home no matter where life took them. I promise to cherish you more than all the gold in the world, Rowan vowed, his voice thick with emotion. To love you through all seasons, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to remember always that our love is the most precious thing I'll ever find. A wife's vows, spoken in a voice that somehow managed to be both strong and tender, touched every heart in the cathedral. I promise to be your partner in all things, to remind you of the poetry in life when the world becomes too practical, to love you not for your success, but for your soul, and to be the home you can always return to. The exchange of rings was particularly meaningful. Iwaf's wedding band was crafted from gold from Rowan's first successful mine, while his was inlaid with tiny diamonds from the display she had been arranging the day they met. As they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, the sunlight through the stained glass seemed to burn brighter, as if nature itself was blessing their union. The kiss that sealed their vows was tender yet passionate, prompting both tears and applause from their guests. As they turned to face their friends and family for the first time as husband and wife, the cathedral bells began to ring, their joyous pealing echoing across the city. The reception that followed was a celebration that would be talked about for years to come. The cathedral gardens had been transformed into an enchanted forest, with thousands of twinkling lights strung between ancient trees. Tables draped in silk held place settings of fine china and crystal, each centerpiece a unique arrangement of golden roses and rare orchids. Their first dance took place as the sun was setting, its golden light creating a natural spotlight. The song was a waltz, arranged to incorporate both classical elements and contemporary touches, much like their relationship. As they moved across the dance floor, Rowan held Iwaf as if she were made of the finest crystal, while she looked at him as if he were more precious than any diamond. "Happy?" he whispered in her ear as they danced. "Beyond words," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder, "though I hope you know you didn't need all this to make me happy. Just you is enough." "You deserve everything," he said firmly. "The grandeur, the fairy tale, all of it. But mostly you deserve to be loved completely, and that's the one thing I know I can give you, without any help from wedding planners or florists." The celebration continued well into the night. There was laughter and dancing, heartfelt toasts and quiet moments stolen in the cathedral's shadowy corners. The cake, a towering creation of gold and white, was cut with ceremonial flair. Each tier told part of their story, from the jewelry store where they met, to the gaslights where they first kissed, from the yacht where they fell in love to the private moments that had led them here. As midnight approached, Rowan led Iwaf away from the crowds to a quiet spot in the garden. Above them, stars twinkled like scattered diamonds across black velvet, and the music from the reception drifted to them on the gentle breeze. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate golden key on a diamond-studded chain. "What does it open?" she asked, running her fingers over the intricate design. "Our future," he replied softly. "I had a house built for us, not a mansion or a showpiece, but a home. Something that's just ours, away from the spotlight and the expectations. A place where we can build our family and our dreams together." Tears sparked in Iwaf's eyes as she kissed him, the key pressed between their hearts. It was perhaps the most thoughtful gift he could have given her. Not just a house, but the promise of a private world where they could simply be themselves. Later, as they prepared to leave the reception, their guests lined the cathedral steps, holding sparklers that turned the night into day. Iwaf changed into a simpler dress of ivory silk, though she kept her veil, her something borrowed from Rowan's mother, who had pulled her aside earlier to welcome her properly to the family. "Take care of each other," the older woman had said, her eyes bright with tears. "Love like yours is rare. Protect it, nurture it, never take it for granted." If only they had known then how prophetic those words would prove to be. If only they had understood that the greatest tests of love come not in the grand moments, but in the quiet ones, when dreams collide with reality and faith must overcome fear. But on that night, as they drove away from their fairy tale wedding toward their honeymoon and their future, all they knew was joy. All they felt was love. All they saw was promise. The cathedral bells rang one final time as their car disappeared into the night, their sound carrying across the sleeping city like a blessing. Inside the car, Ulf lay her head on Rowan's shoulder, her new wedding ring catching the streetlights as they passed. "I love you," she whispered, the words feeling both familiar and brand new. "I love you more," he replied, kissing her temple. "Forever and always." The night wrapped around them like a velvet cloak, full of stars and promises and dreams yet to be dreamed. They were young, they were in love, they were starting their forever. And if there were shadows waiting at the edges of their happiness, well, they couldn't see them yet. Sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows, and the most precious things can become the most painful to lose. But that knowledge belonged to the future. For now, there was just this: two hearts beating as one, a key to a new beginning, and love that felt as eternal as the stars above. As their car turned onto the coast road, heading toward the private jet that would take them to their honeymoon destination, both Rowan and Eowulf felt that peculiar mix of completion and anticipation that marks all great beginnings. They had promised each other forever, and in that moment, forever seemed as certain as the gold on their fingers and the love in their hearts. The wedding of Rowan Goldsmith and Eowulf Jenkins would indeed be remembered as the society event of the year, but its true significance lay not in the grandeur or the expense, but in the love it celebrated, a love that would be tested, broken, and ultimately proven stronger than either of them could have imagined on that starlit night when they first became husband and wife. Chapter 4. The Bitter Years. The first signs of trouble appeared so gradually that neither Rowan nor Eowulf noticed them at first. Like hairline cracks in a perfect diamond, the pressures of their life together began to create almost invisible fissures in their seemingly unbreakable bond. The grand house Rowan had built for them, meant to be filled with the laughter of children, remained eerily quiet, save for the echoes of their growing desperation. Their first year of marriage had been everything they'd dreamed. Eowulf continued her work at Lumineux, though now as the creative director, while Rowan's empire expanded across continents. They traveled the world together, made love in exotic locations, and planned for the family they were certain would come naturally. When months passed without a pregnancy, they simply smiled and said it would happen when the time was right. "We're not in any rush," Eowulf would say at family gatherings, squeezing Rowan's hand under the table. But as their second anniversary approached, the questions became more frequent, the pressure more intense. It was Rowan's mother who first voiced the concern that had been growing in both their minds. During a Sunday dinner at the family estate, she pulled Eowulf aside, while Rowan was discussing business with his father. "Darling," she began, her voice gentle but weighted with significance, "have you and Rowan considered seeing a specialist? The Goldsmith name, well, certain things are expected." Eowulf had maintained her composure, though the words stung like sleet against bare skin. "We're trying," she said simply. But that night she brought it up with Rowan. They were in their private sanctuary, a room they'd designed together, with walls of glass overlooking the ocean and comfortable chairs where they would often sit and talk about their days. Rowan was at his desk reviewing mining reports, while Eowulf curled in her favorite armchair, pretending to read but really gathering her courage. "Perhaps your mother is right," she said finally, closing her book. "Maybe we should see someone." Rowan looked up, his reading glasses catching the light. "You mean a fertility specialist?" "It's been 2 years, Rowan. That's not normal, is it?" The consultation with Dr. Alexandra Morrison, one of the country's leading fertility specialists, marked the beginning of their descent into what would become known as the bitter years. The doctor's office was designed to be comforting, with soft lighting and plush furniture, but nothing could soften the clinical nature of their situation. "Your initial tests show some concerning results," Dr. Morrison explained, her voice professionally neutral as she reviewed their file. "Mrs. Goldsmith, your hormone levels indicate potential difficulties with ovulation, and Mr. Goldsmith, your sperm motility is slightly below optimal levels. However, these are issues we can work with." What followed was a parade of appointments, treatments, and procedures that transformed their romantic journey toward parenthood into a military campaign. Their intimate moments, once spontaneous and passionate, became scheduled around ovulation cycles. Their bathroom counter, once holding luxury perfumes and colognes, now displayed a regiment of hormones and supplements. Aoife approached it all with characteristic determination, researching every treatment option, joining support groups, and maintaining spreadsheets of data that would have impressed Rowan's business analysts. She changed her diet, started acupuncture, and threw herself into yoga and meditation. Rowan matched her dedication, quitting cigars and social drinking, scheduling his business trips around her fertility calendar and accompanying her to every appointment. The first round of IVF filled them with hope. They transformed one of the guest rooms into a future nursery, though they agreed not to decorate it yet. "Just in case," Oif said, but her eyes sparkled with possibility. Those 2 weeks of waiting were both eternal and fleeting. When the pregnancy test came back negative, they held each other and promised it was just the first try. Many couples needed multiple attempts. They would try again and again and again. Each failure carved another line in their hearts, another crack in their foundation. Aoife began to withdraw into herself, spending hours in the empty nursery, sitting in the rocking chair they'd bought in anticipation. Rowan threw himself into his work, expanding his empire as if building more success could somehow guarantee them the one thing money couldn't buy. Their 3rd anniversary passed quietly, neither in the mood to celebrate. The 4th was marked by another failed IVF attempt. By their 5th, the strain was showing in every aspect of their lives. "You're working too hard," a wife said one night, finding Rowan in his study well past midnight. "The doctors said stress could be a factor." "Someone has to pay for all these treatments," he snapped, immediately regretting his words when he saw the hurt flash across her face. "Wife, I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "I know exactly what you meant," she replied, her voice ice-cold, "as if I needed reminding that I'm failing to give you value for your investment." Their arguments, once rare and quickly resolved, became more frequent and bitter. Each monthly disappointment added another layer of resentment, another weight to carry. They began sleeping in separate rooms. "Just until the next treatment cycle," they said, but both knew it was more than that. 6 years into their marriage, they faced another setback. Aoife had developed complications from the hormone treatments, requiring a break from IVF. The forced pause should have given them time to reconnect, to remember why they fell in love, but instead, it only highlighted the distance between them. Rowan's mother, once their biggest supporter, began making subtle suggestions about adoption or surrogacy. "There are other ways to build a family," she said during one of their increasingly rare family dinners. Aoife excused herself from the table, and Rowan found her later in their car, sobbing. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered as he held her. "I can't keep disappointing everyone." "You could never disappoint me," he said, but the words rang hollow against the weight of their shared failure. The pressure from Rowan's board of directors added another layer of stress. The Goldsmith empire needed an heir, they reminded him, in carefully worded memos and pointed comments during meetings. Their concern wasn't just personal. Stock prices had begun to fluctuate as shareholders worried about the future of the company. 8 years into their marriage, they tried one final round of IVF. They approached it differently this time, not telling anyone, not allowing themselves to hope too much. The 2-week wait was excruciating, but they'd had practice at handling disappointment. When the test came back negative, something broke in both of them. Aoife found Rowan in his study that night, several glasses of whiskey into what looked like a serious attempt at drowning his sorrows. "We need to talk about options," she said quietly. "What options?" He laughed bitterly. "We've tried everything, spent millions, and what do we have to show for it?" "We have each other," she reminded him, but her voice wavered. "Do we?" He looked at her then, his eyes hard. "When was the last time we really talked? Really connected? This obsession with having a baby has consumed everything. Our marriage, our happiness, our future." "Obsession?" Oif's voice rose. "You're the one who needs an heir so badly. Your mother, your board, your shareholders, everyone demanding a baby to secure the precious Goldsmith legacy. Don't pretend this hasn't been your obsession too. The charts, the supplements, the endless treatments. You've turned our marriage into a science experiment." The words hung between them like poison darts, too cruel to take back, too true to deny entirely. Oif stepped back, physically recoiling from the venom in his voice. "I've given everything to try to give you what you want," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've put my body through hell, endured your mother's disappointment, sacrificed my career advancement because the treatments were too demanding, and you dare to accuse me of obsession." "What I wanted was my wife back," Rowan shouted, standing so suddenly his chair crashed to the floor. "The woman who saw poetry in diamonds, who made me laugh, who loved me for me, not just as a means to an end." "That woman died a little bit with every negative test, every failed treatment, every pitying look from your family," Oif replied, tears streaming down her face. "And where were you?" "Buried in work, expanding your empire, as if another successful mind could make up for my failures." 10 years into their marriage, the final blow came during a routine checkup. The years of treatments had taken their toll. Oif's doctor advised that further attempts would pose serious risks to her health. The news should have brought them together in shared grief, but instead it drove the final wedge between them. They were in Rowan's study again, the room that had witnessed so many of their battles, when he finally said the words that would shatter their world completely. "What good is a wife who can't give me children?" The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "You're as barren as the mines before I transformed them." Oif stood perfectly still, as if movement might shatter her completely. When she spoke, her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "Well, now we know exactly what I'm worth to you. A failed investment, a barren mine." She turned to leave, but Rowan caught her arm. "Oif, wait. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." She pulled away from him. "You meant every word. And you know what? You're right. I am barren. I am a failure. I couldn't give you the one thing you really wanted, so why don't you do what you do with all your failed investments? Cut your losses." The divorce papers arrived the next day, delivered to her by Rowan's personal lawyer. He hadn't even had the courage to bring them himself. Oif signed them without reading the details, without fighting for the settlement she deserved. She packed a small bag, leaving behind all the jewelry he'd given her, except for 2 pieces, the compass necklace from their early dating days and her engagement ring. The blue diamond caught the light as she placed it on his desk, along with a note that read simply, "Some precious things are beyond price. I thought our love was one of them. I was wrong." She left their dream house that evening, the sun setting behind her as she drove away, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her like grasping fingers. In her rearview mirror, she could see Rowan standing on the front steps, watching her go. He made no move to stop her. That night, in her old apartment that she'd thankfully never sold, Oif curled up in bed and allowed herself to really cry for the first time in years. She cried for the babies they'd never have, for the love they'd lost, for the dream that had shattered like a dropped diamond. What neither of them knew, as they lay awake in separate beds that night, was that fate had one final twist in store. The miracle they'd been praying for all these years was already growing inside her, splitting into three perfect possibilities, waiting to reveal itself at the moment when all hope seemed lost. But that revelation was still a week away. For now there was only the bitter taste of ending, the echo of cruel words, and the knowledge that sometimes the most precious things in life are the ones we destroy ourselves. Chapter 5. Miracle in Disguise. The first wave of nausea hit Oif exactly 1 week after she left the mansion. She was at Crystal Creations Jewelry, where she'd managed to secure a position as a sales associate, a significant step down from her previous role, but she needed to start somewhere. As she arranged a display of engagement rings, oh, the irony, the familiar scent of the store's leather cases suddenly became overwhelming. "Are you all right?" Madison, her new colleague, asked as Oif steadied herself against the counter. "You've gone quite pale." "I'm fine," Oif insisted, though the room seemed to spin slightly. "Just haven't been eating properly since." She didn't finish the sentence. Everyone at the store knew her story, or at least the version that had made its way through Westbrook's gossip mill. The fallen jewelry empress, starting over at the bottom. The dizziness passed, and Oif threw herself back into work. She had always found solace in the presence of beautiful things, in helping others find the perfect piece to mark their special moments, even if her own moment had ended in heartbreak. That evening, alone in her apartment, she found herself absently touching her stomach as another wave of nausea rolled through her. The gesture was so familiar. How many times over the past decade had she done this, hoping, praying for a sign of life within? But this time, something felt different. "It's just stress," she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "The divorce starting over, it's bound to affect me physically." But 3 days later, when even the smell of her morning coffee made her stomach revolt, a tiny spark of something, hope, fear, began to flicker in her heart. She tried to squash it immediately. How many times had she convinced herself that every little symptom meant something? How many times had she been disappointed? Still, when she passed a pharmacy on her way to work, she found herself walking in. The pregnancy tests were in the same aisle they'd always been. She'd bought so many over the years, she could probably find them blindfolded. The cashier's sympathetic smile as she rang up the purchase made Oif want to scream. Did she look that desperate? Back in her apartment's tiny bathroom, Oif followed the familiar routine with trembling hands. How many tests had she taken over the years? Hundreds, probably. Each one a tiny prayer, each negative result another small death of hope. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, setting the timer on her phone. "It's just stress and terrible timing and—" The timer hadn't even finished when 2 clear lines appeared. Oif stared at the test, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. With shaking hands, she pulled out the second test from the box. 2 more lines. Then the third, she'd bought a 3-pack out of habit, showed the same result. "No," she whispered, sliding down to sit on the cold tile floor. "No, no, no, this isn't possible, not now, not after everything." But her body had been trying to tell her for days. The nausea, the dizziness, the exhaustion she'd attributed to emotional stress, it all suddenly made horrible, wonderful sense. The next morning found her in the waiting room of Dr. Sarah Chen's office. She'd chosen a new doctor, unable to face returning to the fertility specialists who had seen her through so many disappointments. Dr. Chen's office was smaller, more intimate than the prestigious clinics she was used to, but somehow that made it easier. The home tests are definitely positive, Dr. Chen confirmed after the initial examination. Let's do an ultrasound to see what we're dealing with. The gel was cold on Aoif's stomach. Some things never changed, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, prepared for disappointment despite the positive tests. She'd been here before, seen the empty darkness where life should be. The doctor's sharp intake of breath made Aoif's heart stop. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong, doctor," Chen said slowly, adjusting the wand. "But Mrs. Goldsmith—" "Ms. Jenkins," Aoif corrected automatically. "Ms. Jenkins," the doctor amended. "I'm seeing 3 distinct heartbeats." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "3? You mean—" "Triplets," Dr. Chen confirmed, turning the screen so Aoif could see more clearly. "All measuring exactly where they should be at 6 weeks. Look, here, here, and here. 3 strong heartbeats." Aoif stared at the screen, at the tiny fluttering lights that represented the impossible made possible. 3 babies. After 10 years of nothing, after countless treatments and procedures, after the cruelest words and the most painful goodbye, 3 miracles had taken root in the midst of her greatest despair. "This is unusual," Dr. Chen continued, her voice gentle. "Given your history of infertility, spontaneous triplets are extremely rare. But all 3 embryos appear to be developing normally." The irony wasn't lost on Aoif. For 10 years they'd tried everything modern medicine could offer, spent millions on treatments, and now, just when she'd lost everything else, her body had finally decided to cooperate, not with 1 baby, but with 3. "The timing," she managed to say through numb lips. "This means, based on their development, conception would have occurred approximately 6 weeks ago," Dr. Chen confirmed. "Around the time of our last night together," Aoif finished. "The night before the final argument, before those cruel words that had ended everything. They had made love one last time, both knowing it was goodbye but neither willing to say it. And now, the rest of the appointment passed in a blur." Dr. Chen explained the risks of a triplet pregnancy, the need for careful monitoring, the lifestyle changes required. Aoif nodded in all the right places, clutching the ultrasound printouts like lifelines. Back in her apartment, she sat in the window seat, the only feature of the small space that had made her fall in love with it years ago, and stared at the grainy images. 3 tiny lives, each no bigger than a grape, yet already turning her world upside down again. The practical questions began to surface through her shock. How would she manage? Her new job barely covered the rent on this modest apartment. The divorce settlement she'd walked away from would have provided security, but her pride had prevented her from fighting for what she deserved. Now, it wasn't just about her anymore. "We'll figure it out," she promised, touching her still flat stomach. Somehow. The next few weeks became an exercise in secrecy and determination. Morning sickness hit her hard, though morning was a cruel misnomer, as it seemed to last all day. She learned to keep crackers in her pockets at work, to breathe through the waves of nausea that certain jewelry-cleaning solutions now triggered, to excuse herself casually when the dizziness became too much. Madison covered for her more than once, never asking questions, but always seeming to appear with ginger tea or a sympathetic smile when needed. The other staff at Crystal Creations gradually became her support system. Though she hadn't told them about the pregnancy yet, they simply saw a woman rebuilding her life and decided to help. At 8 weeks, another ultrasound confirmed what still seemed impossible. 3 healthy fetuses, growing exactly as they should. Dr. Chen began talking about specialists, about the need for more comprehensive care than her small practice could provide. "The Westbrook Medical Center has an excellent high-risk pregnancy unit," she suggested carefully. Aoif shook her head immediately. That's where we did all our fertility treatments." "I can't—" Dr. Chen understood without further explanation. She found a respected specialist at a hospital in the next city, one who could monitor the high-risk pregnancy without stirring up painful memories. The commute would be challenging, but Awaifa was determined. She had started taking the bus everywhere, having sold her car to build up a small emergency fund. The proceeds from selling most of her jewelry collection, keeping only the compass necklace that reminded her of happier times, had given her enough to cover a few months' rent. But she knew she needed to plan for the future. At 10 weeks, as she sat in her tiny kitchen eating saltine crackers, the only food that didn't make her immediately nauseous, Awaifa finally allowed herself to really think about Rowan. Should she tell him? It was his right to know, wasn't it? But the memory of his last words to her, as barren as the mines, still burned like acid in her heart. "He threw us away," she told her growing bump, which was already showing more than she'd expected. "He doesn't get to claim you now that you're finally here." The decision made, she threw herself into preparing for her new reality. She took extra shifts at the store, started looking for a slightly larger apartment that might accommodate 3 babies, and began researching everything she could about multiple pregnancies. The local library became her second home, their free internet access saving her the expense of home Wi-Fi. At 12 weeks, she couldn't hide it anymore. Her body, always slim, was changing rapidly to accommodate 3 growing lives. The morning she couldn't button her work skirt, she knew it was time to tell her employers. Mr. Harrison, the owner of Crystal Creations, listened to her news with surprising warmth. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said, reminding her so much of her father that tears sprang to her eyes. "We'll work something out." They adjusted her schedule to allow for doctor's appointments, found her a stool to use during long shifts, and even started a small pool to help her buy essential baby items. The kindness of these relative strangers, who knew her only as Awaifa, the sales associate, not as the former Mrs. Goldsmith, touched her deeply. The first time she felt them move, 3 distinct flutters like butterfly wings. She was helping a young couple choose their engagement ring. The joy on their faces as they planned their future triggered a bittersweet ache in her heart, but the gentle movement inside her reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. "Your babies are fighters," Dr. Williams, her new specialist, told her at 14 weeks. "All 3 are developing beautifully. Would you like to know the genders?" Awaifa hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I need to plan." 2 girls and a boy, the doctor announced, pointing them out on the screen, all looking perfectly healthy. That night, alone in her apartment, Awaifa allowed herself to really cry for the first time since discovering the pregnancy. Not from sadness or fear, though both emotions were certainly present, but from a complicated mix of gratitude and grief. Her babies were healthy, growing, perfect. Everything she and Rowan had dreamed of for so long. But he would never know the joy of seeing them on the ultrasound screen, of feeling them move, of planning their futures. "It's his choice," she reminded herself firmly. "He made it clear what I was worth to him." As her second trimester progressed, Awaifa developed a routine. Work during the day, prenatal yoga classes at the community center in the evening, free for expectant mothers, and nights spent planning and preparing. She took online courses in business management, determined to advance beyond her sales position. Her colleagues at Crystal Creations became increasingly protective, especially after she fainted during a particularly busy Saturday. "You're carrying precious cargo," Madison teased, but her eyes were serious. "Let us help." The pregnancy progressed against all odds, 3 miracle babies growing stronger every day. Awaifa's body, which had refused to cooperate for so long, now seemed determined to do everything right. Yes, she was exhausted constantly. Yes, her feet swelled until she could barely wear shoes. Yes, she worried constantly about money and the future. But every kick, every hiccup, every flutter reminded her that she was never truly alone anymore. At 20 weeks, she finally called her parents, who had moved to Ireland after her wedding. Their joy was tempered with concern. How would she manage alone? But they promised to come help as soon as the babies arrived. "You don't have to do this by yourself," her mother insisted. "I'm not doing it by myself," Aoife replied, touching her growing belly. "I have my children. We'll figure it out together." The nursery she set up in the corner of her bedroom was nothing like the grand one she and Rowan had planned, but it was filled with love. Second-hand furniture, carefully cleaned and painted, tiny clothes from consignment shops, each one chosen with care. 3 small cribs, bought with the combined contributions of her Crystal Creations family. Sometimes late at night, when sleep eluded her, Oif would sit in the rocking chair, a gift from Mr. Harrison, and talk to her babies. She told them about their father, not the man who had hurt her so deeply, but the man she had fallen in love with, the one who saw poetry in precious stones and promise in her eyes. "He would have loved you so much," she whispered. "The man he used to be would have moved heaven and earth for you. But sometimes people change, and we have to be strong enough to go on without them." As her due date approached, Aoife faced her new reality with a mixture of terror and determination. She had no idea how she would manage 3 newborns on her own, how she would juggle work and motherhood, how she would give them everything they deserved. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. These babies were her miracle, her redemption, her proof that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disasters. What she didn't know, as she prepared for her new life, was that fate wasn't finished with her story yet. Somewhere across the city, in a mansion that felt more like a mausoleum, Rowan Goldsmith was about to discover that his greatest mistake had led to his greatest miracle. But by then, it might be too late to claim it. Chapter 6. 3 Little Stars. The storm that raged outside Westbrook Memorial Hospital on the night the triplets were born seemed to mirror the tumult of emotions in Aoife's heart. Rain lashed against the windows of her delivery room, thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning illuminated the city in brief, brilliant flashes. It was as if nature itself was participating in the drama of bringing 3 new lives into the world. Aoife had been preparing for this moment for months, but nothing could have truly readied her for the intensity of it. She'd made it to 34 weeks, a triumph with triplets, before her water broke during a quiet evening at home. Madison, who had taken to checking on her after work, had been there when it happened and immediately sprang into action. "Everything's going to be fine," Madison kept saying as they made their way to the hospital, though her white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel betrayed her nervousness. "We've practiced for this. We've got the plan." The plan had seemed so rational when they'd made it: how to contact the hospital, what route to take, who would be called and when. But now, as contractions ripped through her body with increasing frequency, Aoife found herself wishing for something she'd sworn she wouldn't want: Rowan's hand to hold. "Focus on your breathing," the nurse encouraged as they wheeled her into the delivery room. "Dr. Williams is on her way. Your babies are going to be just fine." The delivery room quickly filled with medical personnel. 3 separate teams, 1 for each baby. The organized chaos reminded Aoife of the preparations for grand jewelry exhibitions, except this time the precious things being prepared for were her own children. "Ms. Jenkins," Dr. Williams arrived in a flurry of controlled energy, already gowned and gloved. "I see our little ones have decided to make their debut during the storm of the century. How very dramatic of them." A particularly strong contraction gripped Oaf, making her grab the rails of the bed. "They're definitely up making an entrance," she managed through gritted teeth. The next few hours became a blur of pain, encouragement, and determination. Madison stayed by her side, letting Oif crush her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths. The storm continued outside, providing a dramatic soundtrack to the most important night of Oif's life. "The first baby is crowning," Dr. Williams announced, after what felt like eternities of pushing. "One more big push, Oif. Let's meet your first little star." At exactly 11:47 p.m., Aurora Faith Jenkins announced her arrival with a cry as strong as the storm outside. She was whisked away immediately to be checked by her designated medical team, but not before Oif caught a glimpse of golden hair, just like her father's. "Baby A is looking good," one of the pediatricians called out. "Strong vitals, good color." There was no time to dwell on Aurora's arrival because her siblings were eager to follow. At 11:52 p.m., Atlas Hope Jenkins emerged, his cry slightly softer but no less determined than his sister's. And finally, at 11:58 p.m., Archer Grace Jenkins completed the trio, her entrance marked by a particularly dramatic crash of thunder. "3 healthy babies," Dr. Williams announced, her eyes crinkling above her surgical mask in what Oif knew was a smile. "You did beautifully, Oif. They're all at excellent weights for triplets." The next few hours passed in a haze of first examinations, careful monitoring, and brief but precious moments with each baby. Though they needed some time in the NICU due to being slightly premature, all 3 were remarkably healthy. Oif drifted in and out of exhausted sleep, waking each time to make sure it hadn't all been a dream. It was dawn before she really got to study her children properly. The storm had passed, and the first rays of morning sun filtered through the hospital windows as nurses brought the babies to her room for feeding. Aurora, the firstborn, had a determined set to her tiny jaw that reminded Oif of herself. Her hair was the exact shade of gold that Rowan's became in sunlight, and when she opened her eyes, they were the warm brown of Oif's own. She was the largest of the 3, weighing in at 4 pounds 8 ounces. Atlas, sandwiched between his sisters in birth order, and the smallest at 4 pounds even, had a peaceful demeanor that seemed at odds with the dramatic circumstances of his arrival. His hair was a shade darker than his sister's, and his eyes, when they fluttered open, held hints of his father's amber tones. Archer, the baby of the family by 11 minutes, had a delicate beauty that brought tears to Oif's eyes. She was a perfect blend of her parents, with Oif's curls but Rowan's coloring, and eyes that seemed to shift between brown and gold depending on the light. "They're absolutely perfect," Madison whispered, having returned after a brief trip home to change clothes. "And they all look like you." "They look like him too," Oif said softly, tracing Aurora's tiny features with a gentle finger. "They have his coloring, his nose." She swallowed hard. "But they're mine. All mine." The first few days in the hospital were a crash course in caring for 3 newborns. The nurses taught Oif how to tandem feed, how to burp tiny premature babies, how to change diapers that seemed impossibly small. Her colleagues from Crystal Creations took turns visiting, bringing gifts and offers of help that made her cry with gratitude. Mr. Harrison arrived with 3 handcrafted silver rattles, each engraved with one of the baby's names and birthstones. "Every child deserves something precious of their own," he said gruffly, clearly emotional at the sight of the tiny infants. Oif's parents arrived from Ireland on the baby's 3rd day, having caught the first flight they could after hearing she was in labor. Her mother took one look at the triplets and burst into tears. "They're magnificent," she declared, immediately taking charge of the situation in the way only grandmothers can. "Now, love, let's talk about how we're going to manage this." The question of management was indeed pressing. Oif's tiny apartment, barely adequate for a single mother, was clearly impossible for a family of 4. Her savings, even with careful budgeting, wouldn't last long with 3 babies to provide for. "Move home with us," her father suggested. "To Ireland. We can help you raise them." But Aoife shook her head. "This is their home. They deserve to grow up where—" She paused, then continued firmly, "where they can have all the opportunities possible. I'll figure something out." Her mother exchanged a look with her father that Aoife pretended not to see. They both knew she was being stubborn, but they also knew their daughter well enough to recognize when her mind was made up. The babies were released from the hospital after 2 weeks, all having gained weight and proven their resilience. The day Aoife brought them home to her apartment was both terrifying and triumphant. Madison and several other colleagues had cleaned the place thoroughly and stocked the kitchen with easy-to-prepare meals, but nothing could fully prepare her for the reality of caring for 3 newborns alone. The first night was the hardest. The babies seemed to tag-team their crying, ensuring that the moment one settled, another would wake up hungry or needing a change. Aoife moved between the 3 cribs, like a dancer performing a complicated routine, her body aching from childbirth and lack of sleep, her heart so full of love it felt like it might burst. "We can do this," she whispered to Aurora as she fed her at 3 a.m. "We're strong enough." "We'll figure it out," she promised Atlas as she changed him at 4 a.m. "Mama's got you." "We don't need anyone else," she told Archer as she rocked her at 5 a.m. "We're a perfect team, just as we are." But in the quiet moments between feedings and changes, when all 3 babies were miraculously asleep at once, Aoife allowed herself to imagine a different scenario. She pictured Rowan holding their son, marveling at how tiny their daughter's fingers were, helping with middle-of-the-night feedings. The pain of these fantasies was sharp enough to take her breath away. The babies developed distinct personalities almost immediately. Aurora was the leader, always the first to cry for attention and the last to settle. Atlas was the peacemaker, somehow managing to sleep through his sister's loudest moments and offering heart-melting smiles to everyone who came near. Archer was the observer, taking everything in with those remarkable eyes that seemed wise beyond her weeks. Aoife's parents stayed for the first month, helping establish routines and teaching her tricks for managing 3 babies that only experienced parents would know. Her mother showed her how to bathe them efficiently, how to tell their different cries apart, how to snatch moments of rest whenever possible. "You're doing amazingly," her mother assured her one evening, watching Aoife simultaneously bottle-feed Aurora and Archer while humming to Atlas in his bouncer. "But you don't have to do it all alone." "I'm not alone," Aoife replied, looking down at her children. "I have them." The reality of returning to work loomed as her maternity leave drew to a close. Mr. Harrison had been incredibly understanding, holding her position and even offering flexible hours. But the logistics of working while caring for triplets seemed impossible. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, who owned the dry cleaning business next to Crystal Creations, had a sister who ran a licensed home daycare. After meeting Arf and the babies, she offered a special rate that, while still steep, was just manageable with careful budgeting. "Children are blessings," Mrs. Chen said simply when Aoife tried to thank her. "They should be cherished, not worried over." As the babies reached their 1-month milestone, Aoife began to find her rhythm. She learned to function on minimal sleep, to change 3 diapers in record time, to tell from the slightest sound which baby needed attention. Her tiny apartment became a well-oiled machine of baby care, with everything arranged for maximum efficiency. The physical resemblance to Rowan in all 3 babies was sometimes painful to see, but it also gave her a strange comfort. Aurora had his determined set of jaw when she was concentrating on something like figuring out how to grasp a toy. Atlas had his exact smile, especially when he was just waking up, and Archer had his thoughtful expression, the one he used to wear when examining particularly fine diamonds. "Your papa would be so proud of you," she would sometimes whisper when she was sure no one could hear. "He would have loved you so much if he'd been the man I thought he was." The babies grew and thrived, defying all the concerns about premature triplets. At their 1-month checkup, Dr. Williams was delighted with their progress. "They're fighters, just like their mother," she declared, watching Aurora attempt to roll over well before she should have been able to. "You've done an amazing job, Oif." That evening, as Awifa sat in the rocking chair with all 3 babies somehow arranged in her arms for their bedtime story, a sense of peace washed over her. Yes, she was exhausted. Yes, the future was uncertain. Yes, there were moments when she missed Rowan so much it felt like a physical pain. But she had 3 perfect miracles who needed her, who loved her unconditionally, who had given her life new purpose and meaning. They were her North Star now, guiding her toward a future she never could have imagined. What she didn't know then was that this peaceful period was just the calm before another storm. In a few years' time, their carefully constructed world would be shaken by the reappearance of the one person who could threaten everything, a father who didn't know he had 3 children, and who would soon discover that his greatest loss had led to his greatest blessing. But for now, in the gentle quiet of their small apartment, with 3 sleeping babies breathing in perfect harmony, Awif was content. The compass necklace she still wore caught the light as she bent to kiss each tiny forehead, reminding her that sometimes the journey home takes unexpected turns. "Sweet dreams, my little stars," she whispered, her voice full of the fierce love that only a mother can know. "Tomorrow is another adventure." Outside, the city settled into night, unaware that within its bounds 3 tiny miracles were growing stronger every day, waiting for the moment when their very existence would bridge the gap between lost love and future hope. Chapter 7. The Revelation. 5 years had changed Rowan Goldsmith in ways that were both subtle and profound. The golden boy of the mining industry had grown harder, colder, his success now tinged with an edge of ruthlessness that made his board of directors happy, but left him feeling hollow. His relationship with Jade Monroe, begun 2 years after Aoife left, had proved to be as superficial as the diamonds she coveted, ending in betrayal that only reinforced his cynicism. That autumn morning, as his chauffeur drove him past Westbrook Academy, the city's most prestigious private school, Rowan was absorbed in reading reports on his tablet. The school's ornate gates were open, parents' luxury vehicles forming an orderly queue for morning drop-off. It was a scene he'd passed hundreds of times without notice, but today something caught his eye. A flash of golden hair, multiplied by 3, as a group of children crossed the courtyard. "Stop the car!" he ordered suddenly, causing his driver to brake sharply. "Sir?" Harrison, who had been with him through everything, including the divorce, glanced in the rearview mirror with concern. "Pull over there!" Rowan pointed to a spot with a clear view of the school entrance. His heart was racing, though he couldn't explain why. Something about those children had triggered a response, deep in his subconscious, like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. Through the ornate iron gates, he watched as 3 small figures made their way toward the school building. They moved in perfect synchronization, their matching navy uniforms and golden hair catching the morning light. 2 girls and a boy, he noted automatically, all around kindergarten age. Then one of the girls turned, and Rowan's world tilted on its axis. She had Aoife's eyes, his mother's nose, his own determined expression. The other 2 children turned as well, revealing faces that were like looking at a photograph album of his own childhood, blended with Aoife's delicate features. "Harrison," his voice was barely steady, "find out everything you can about those children." His driver's expression in the mirror was carefully neutral. "Of course, sir. Shall I—" "Everything," Rowan repeated, his eyes fixed on the triplets as they disappeared into the building. Their names, their age, their... He swallowed hard. Their mother. The investigation took less than a day, money and influence opening doors that should have remained closed. The information arrived in a thick folder on his desk that evening, each page confirming what his heart had known the moment he saw those familiar features: Aurora Faith, Atlas Hope, and Archer Grace Jenkins. Born 5 years ago at Westbrook Memorial Hospital during the worst storm in decades. Mother, Owife Jenkins. Father, listed as unknown. But the timing. Rowan's hands shook as he calculated the dates. Their birth, just 8 months after he'd last seen Owife. The fertility treatments that had supposedly failed, the cruel words he'd thrown at her like weapons. "Sir!" Harrison stood in the doorway, concern evident on his face. "There's more." The more was a series of photographs taken over the past 5 years. Owife, leaving a small apartment building with 3 baby carriers. Owife working at Crystal Creations Jewelry, a far cry from her former position at Millionaire. Owife at a public park, pushing 3 toddlers on swings. The triplets growing, thriving, bearing undeniable resemblance to both their parents. "She never told me," Rowan whispered, touching a photo of Atlas, his son, his heir, laughing at something outside the frame. "All this time." "If I may, sir," Harrison said carefully, "given the circumstances of your separation." The memory of that final argument hit Rowan like a physical blow. He'd called her barren, worthless, compared her to an empty mine. And all the while, she had been carrying not 1 but 3 miracles. "I need proof," he said suddenly, standing up. "Absolute, undeniable proof." The DNA tests were arranged through a private lab, samples collected during the school's routine health screening program. Money smoothed the way, ethics pushed aside in Rowan's desperate need to confirm what he already knew in his heart. The results arrived a week later, leaving no room for doubt. Aurora, Atlas, and Archer were his children, his blood, his legacy, the heirs he'd cruelly accused Owife of being unable to provide. Rowan spent the next few days in a daze of revelation and regret. He had his security team compile detailed reports on every aspect of his children's lives. He learned that Aurora was already reading at a 2nd-grade level, that Atlas had a natural talent for mathematics, that Archer could draw with remarkable skill for her age. He discovered their favorite foods, their daily routines, their little personalities that seemed to be perfect combinations of himself and Owife. But it was the glimpses of their life with Owife that truly broke his heart. The tiny apartment where she'd raised 3 babies alone, the modest salary that barely covered their necessities, the careful budgeting evident in their clothes and toys, always good quality, but clearly chosen for durability rather than luxury. "She did it all alone," he murmured, watching through tinted car windows as Owife picked the children up from school. She looked different now, stronger somehow, despite being thinner than he remembered. She wore no jewelry except the compass necklace he'd given her years ago, but she carried herself with a dignity that no amount of expensive accessories could match. The children ran to her with obvious joy, all 3 talking at once about their day. She knelt down to their level, giving each one her full attention, responding to their stories with genuine interest. The love between them was palpable, even from a distance. "Take me back to the office," Rowan ordered abruptly, unable to watch any more. His mind was already racing with plans, calculations, strategies. He had lost 5 years with his children. He wouldn't lose another day. His legal team worked through the night, preparing documents that would change everything. DNA proof of paternity, evidence of his ability to provide. A contract that would force Owife to acknowledge his rights as a father. But as he sat in his study, looking at a recent photo of the triplets, doubt crept in. He had no legal or moral high ground here. He had abandoned their mother at her most vulnerable moment, thrown away their marriage over the very thing that had miraculously come to pass. What right did he have to disrupt their lives now? The answer came in Aurora's smile, so like his mother's. In Atlas's thoughtful expression, mirroring his own. In Archer's artistic talent, reminiscent of his father's. They were his children too, and he had already missed too much. 2 weeks after his initial discovery, Rowan finally gathered his courage and drove to Crystal Creations. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, prepared arguments and appeals, but when he saw Oif through the store window, all his carefully planned words evaporated. She was helping a young couple choose an engagement ring, her expertise evident in her gentle guidance. She looked up as the door chimed, and for a moment their eyes met across the showroom floor. 5 years of absence, of unspoken words, of hidden truths hung between them. "Awifa," he said softly, watching as all colour drained from her face. "We need to talk about our children." The emphasis on "our" was slight but unmistakable. He saw the moment she realized he knew, saw the flash of fear quickly masked by determination. She turned to her colleague, murmured something about taking her break, and led him to the store's small office. "How did you find out?" she asked without preamble, her voice steady despite her apparent tension. "I saw them at Westbrook Academy," he replied, noting how she flinched at the school's name. "They looked just like—" "You have no right," she interrupted, her hands clenched at her sides. "You gave up any right to them when you threw me away like a failed investment." "I was wrong," Rowan said, the words feeling insufficient but necessary. "I was cruel and stupid and wrong. But they're my children too, wife. I've missed 5 years of their lives. I won't miss any more." "They're happy," she said fiercely. "We're happy. We don't need you coming in now to disrupt everything just because you've suddenly decided you want to play father." "I'm not playing," he countered, pulling out the DNA results. "I am their father, and I want to be part of their lives." Oifa looked at the papers but didn't touch them. "You had tests done without my knowledge or consent?" "I had to know for sure." "No, you didn't. You could have asked me. You could have approached me like a decent human being instead of going behind my back. But that's not your style, is it, Rowan? You see something you want and you just take it." Her words stung because they were true. He had approached this like a business transaction, using money and influence to get information he could have simply requested. "You're right," he admitted, watching surprise flicker across her face. "I handled this badly. But please, Oif, give me a chance to make it right. Not with you. I know I've lost that right, but with them. Let me know my children." She was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those honey-brown eyes that had once looked at him with love. Finally she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "I'll need time to think about this, and if I agree to any arrangement, it will be on my terms. They're not acquisitions, Rowan. They're children, our children, and I won't let you hurt them the way you hurt me." He wanted to argue, to push, to demand, but he recognized the steel in her voice. This was the woman who had raised 3 babies alone rather than fight him for support, who had rebuilt her life from scratch rather than rely on his money, who had given their children everything he should have been there to provide. "Your terms," he agreed quietly. "But please don't take too long. I've missed so much already." As he left the store, he heard her soft words, perhaps not meant for his ears. "So have they, Rowan. So have they." The drive back to his office was a blur of emotion and memory. He thought of all the moments he'd missed, their birth, their first steps, their first words. He thought of Off, going through pregnancy and delivery alone, working long hours to provide for their children, sacrificing everything to give them a good life. In his study that evening, Rowan looked at the family photos on his desk, generations of goldsmiths, their legacy captured in silver frames. Now there were 3 new branches of the family tree, growing strong despite his absence, thriving under Oif's careful nurturing. "I'll make it right," he promised the photo of his children. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll find a way to deserve you." But as he sat there, surrounded by the trappings of his success, Rowan Goldsmith faced the hardest truth of all. Some things can't be bought, some wounds can't be healed with money, and some mistakes leave scars that no amount of regret can erase. The real question was, could he prove to Aif and to himself that he was worthy of the second chance he so desperately wanted? Chapter 8. The Contract. A week after their confrontation at Crystal Creations, Aif sat in her tiny living room, surrounded by finger paintings and homework sheets, trying to make the hardest decision of her life. The triplets were asleep in their shared bedroom, their soft breathing a counterpoint to the ticking of the clock on the wall. She had spent every free moment since Rowan's appearance weighing her options, considering the impact on her children, and wrestling with her own complicated emotions. The compass necklace she still wore seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, as if pointing her toward a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. The sound of a car pulling up outside drew her to the window. Rowan's familiar silhouette emerged from a black Mercedes, and even from 3 stories up she could see his hesitation as he approached the building. She had chosen this meeting time deliberately, after the children's bedtime, to have this difficult conversation without little ears listening. When she buzzed him up, Aif took a moment to survey her apartment through his eyes. The space was small, but meticulously organized, every inch utilized efficiently. Children's artwork covered the walls, 3 distinct styles already emerging: Aurora's bold strokes, Atlas's precise patterns, and Archer's detailed drawings. 3 small desks lined one wall, each personalized with nameplates the children had made themselves. Everything spoke of love, careful planning, and dedication. The knock at the door was soft, almost tentative. When she opened it, Rowan stood there looking uncharacteristically uncertain, a thick folder tucked under his arm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said formally, then his eyes caught sight of a family photo on the wall. Aif, with the triplets at their 5th birthday party, all 4 faces alight with joy. His composure cracked slightly. "They look so happy." "They are happy," Aif replied, gesturing him toward the small sitting area. "That's why this conversation is so difficult." Rowan sat carefully on the edge of the sofa, looking almost comically large in the modest space. His eyes kept darting to the children's things: a forgotten stuffed animal, a tiny shoe under the coffee table, 3 backpacks hung neatly by the door. "I've been thinking about your words," he began, setting the folder aside. "About how I approached this like a business transaction. You were right, but I want to do better. I want to be part of their lives, but I want to do it right." Aif studied him carefully. 5 years had added silver threads to his temples and new lines around his eyes, but it was the hint of vulnerability in his expression that caught her attention. This was not the cold, cruel man who had dismissed her so easily. This was something else. "I have conditions," she said finally, "non-negotiable ones." "I assumed you would." He gestured to the folder. "I've had my lawyers draw up some papers, but I want to hear your conditions first. This needs to be something we both agree on, for the children's sake." Aif took a deep breath. "First, we do not tell them who you are right away. They're too young to understand the complexity of this situation. For now, you'll be introduced as a family friend. We'll work up to the truth gradually when they're ready." Rowan flinched but nodded. "That's fair. What else?" "Second, we do this on their schedule, not yours. No sudden demands for time or attention. They have routines, activities, friends. Their lives won't be disrupted just because you've decided to be present now." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "I want to fit into their lives, not upend them." "Third," Aif continued, her voice growing stronger, "no attempts to buy their affection. No extravagant gifts, no sudden trips to Disneyland, no ponies or private jets. They're being raised with solid values, and I won't have that undermined. This requirement seemed to pain him more than the others. I have 5 years of birthdays and Christmases to make up for. And you'll do it gradually, appropriately, and with my approval, she cut in firmly. They don't need guilt gifts, Rowan. They need consistency and genuine care. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. What else? Fourth, we maintain absolute privacy. No press, no public announcements, no society pages getting wind of this. They deserve a normal childhood, not a media circus. Agreed. I've already taken steps to ensure discretion. Finally, Ayoif said, meeting his eyes directly. You commit to this fully or not at all. These are children, Rowan. Not quarterly reports you can check in on when convenient. If you start this relationship with them, you see it through. No disappearing when it gets difficult or when something more interesting comes along. The implied reference to his past behavior made him wince. I won't abandon them, Ayoif. I've already missed too much. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Now, what's in your folder? Rowan opened the document folder, revealing a thick contract. My lawyers suggested a formal agreement, but I want your input on every point. The key provisions are... He outlined a comprehensive plan that covered everything from visitation schedules to education funds, from healthcare to security arrangements. The document was thorough, clearly prepared by top attorneys, but as Ayoif read through it, she noted something interesting. Every clause included room for her input and approval. You're proposing we move into the mansion, she observed, reaching that section. That's not happening. Please hear me out, Rowan said quickly. The East Wing is completely separate, with its own entrance. You and the children would have total privacy and independence. It would give them more space, access to better schools, a safer environment. We're doing fine where we are, our wife interrupted. Are you? He gestured around the small apartment. 3 growing children in a 2-bedroom apartment, working long hours for barely enough to cover expenses. Let me help, Ayoif. Not for you, though God knows I owe you that, but for them. She was quiet for a long moment, looking around the space that had been their sanctuary for 5 years. It was small, yes, but it was filled with love and memories. Still, the children were getting bigger. They needed room to grow, to play, to develop their individual interests. Separate entrances, she asked finally. Completely independent living spaces. You'd have your own kitchen, living areas, everything. The children would have proper bedrooms, a playroom, study space. There's a garden, a pool with safety features. They deserve every advantage, Ayoif. She could feel her resolve weakening. And you'd stay in your wing? No unexpected visits, no pushing. They're boundaries. Everything on your terms, he promised. We can even put it in writing, strict guidelines about shared spaces and timing. Ayoif stood and walked to the children's bedroom door, opening it quietly. The triplets slept peacefully, their beds arranged in the small space like puzzle pieces. Aurora sprawled across her covers, one arm flung dramatically overhead. Atlas curled on his side, clutching his favorite book. Archer lay perfectly straight, her long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. They deserve everything, she whispered, more to herself than to Rowan. Then, turning back to him, I want to add some conditions to your contract. They spent the next 3 hours going through the document line by line. Ayoif insisted on maintaining full custody and final say in all major decisions. Rowan could be involved in their education and activities, but any changes to their current arrangements had to be approved by her. Financial support would be provided through a trust for the children, not as direct payments to Ayoif. I don't want your money, she said firmly when he tried to argue this point. The children's needs will be provided for, but I maintain my independence. The most difficult negotiations centered around how to introduce Rowan into their lives. They agreed on a gradual approach, beginning with casual interactions that would allow the children to become comfortable with him before any revelations about his true identity. "We'll need a story," our wife pointed out. "They're clever. They'll ask questions about why you're suddenly around." "Tell them I'm an old friend who's moved back to town," Rowan suggested. "It's not entirely untrue." By midnight, they had hammered out an agreement that both could live with. The contract was extensive, covering everything from daily routines to holiday arrangements, from education plans to healthcare decisions. But more importantly, it established boundaries and expectations that would protect the children while allowing for the development of relationships. "There's one more thing," Rowan said, as they finished reviewing the final draft. He pulled out another document. "I want to amend my will. Regardless of how this arrangement works out, the children should be provided for as my heirs." O'Weef started to protest, but he held up a hand. "This isn't about you or me. They're goldsmiths, whether they know it yet or not. They deserve their birthright." As she walked him to the door, O'Weef felt both exhausted and oddly hopeful. The contract they'd created wasn't just a legal document, it was a framework for building something new from the ashes of their past. "When can I meet them?" Rowan asked softly, pausing in the doorway. "Properly, I mean, as your friend." O'Weef thought for a moment. "They have a recital at school next week. Come to that. Watch from the audience. Let them see you there first, supporting them without pressure." His eyes lit up. "They perform?" "Aurora plays piano. She's quite good for her age. Atlas does martial arts demonstrations, and Archer's in the art club. They're displaying their work in the hallway." The pride in her voice made Rowan's heart ache for all he'd missed. "I'll be there, back row, unobtrusive. Just tell me what time." After he left, Arv checked on the children one more time. They slept on, unaware that their world was about to change. She touched each small face gently, wondering if she'd made the right decision. Aurora shifted in her sleep, murmuring something about stars. Atlas clutched his book tighter, a small smile playing on his lips. Archer sighed softly, her fingers twitching as if drawing in her dreams. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," Oifer whispered to her sleeping children. "I hope he proves worthy of knowing you." The next morning, as she helped the triplets prepare for school, O'Weef watched them with new awareness. They chatted about their upcoming recital, excited to show off their achievements. Would they notice the tall man in the back row? Would they sense the weight of his gaze, the years of longing, the desperate need to be part of their lives? "Mama, are you okay?" Atlas asked, noticing her distraction. "You look worried." O'Weef smiled, smoothing his golden hair, so like his father's. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about how lucky I am to have you three." "We're lucky too," Aurora declared, hugging her fiercely. "We have the best mama in the world." Archer joined the hug silently, her wise eyes studying O'Weef's face as if she could read the thoughts behind her mother's smile. As they left for school, O'Weef touched the compass necklace she still wore. For 5 years, it had reminded her of a love lost, a dream shattered. Now perhaps it could guide them all towards something new, not a restoration of what was broken, but the creation of something different, something that put the children's needs first. The contract sat on her coffee table, waiting to be formally signed and notarized. It was more than a legal document. It was a map for the future, a framework for building relationships that should have existed from the start. Whether it would lead to healing or more heartbreak remained to be seen. But as she watched her children walk into their school, their golden heads catching the morning light, Ofer knew one thing with certainty. Whatever came next, she would protect them with everything she had. They were her miracle, her redemption, her greatest achievement, and if Rowan wanted to be part of their lives, he would have to prove himself worthy of that privilege. The compass around her neck seemed to warm slightly, as if acknowledging the new direction their lives were about to take. Chapter 9. Strangers Under One Roof. The east wing of the Goldsmith mansion had been transformed according to Owaif's specifications. Gone were the austere antiques and priceless artworks, replaced by comfortable furniture and child-friendly spaces. The walls, once covered in heavy silk, now displayed colorful educational posters and the children's artwork. It was a home within a home, carefully designed to maintain the delicate balance between two separate lives. Moving day arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. Owaif watched as the children explored their new rooms, their excitement evident in their squeals and rapid-fire questions. Each child had their own space for the first time, decorated to reflect their emerging personalities. Aurora's room was painted in shades of blue and silver, with a grand piano in the corner, a housewarming gift that Rowan had insisted was educational rather than extravagant. Atlas's space was filled with books and science equipment, including a telescope positioned perfectly to view the night sky through his window. Archer's room had been set up as a mini art studio with an easel by the window and storage for her growing collection of supplies. "Mama, look!" Aurora called, spinning in the center of her room. "I can practice whenever I want now. And I can see the stars," Atlas added from his position by the telescope. Archer said nothing, but her smile as she arranged her art supplies spoke volumes. The move itself was straightforward. They didn't own much, and Owaif had insisted on bringing their familiar furniture to maintain some sense of continuity. Their worn but comfortable sofa looked oddly charming against the mansion's grand architecture, a symbol of their determination to maintain their identity in this new setting. Rowan had respected their space during the move, though Owaif occasionally caught glimpses of him watching from windows in the main wing. They had agreed to maintain strict boundaries, separate entrances, separate schedules, separate lives under one roof. But proximity had a way of creating its own complications. The first real test came at dinner time. The children, excited by their new surroundings, were full of questions about the mansion and its owner. "Who's the man in the garden?" Atlas asked, referring to a glimpse he'd caught of Rowan earlier. "That's Mr. Goldsmith," Owaif explained carefully, using the name they'd agreed upon for now. "He owns this house. Remember how I told you he's an old friend who's letting us stay in this wing?" "He looks sad," Archer observed quietly, pushing her peas around her plate. Owaif's heart clenched at her daughter's perceptiveness. "Sometimes grown-ups have a lot on their minds that makes them look sad," she deflected. "Now, who wants to help me unpack the books after dinner?" The children's routine remained largely unchanged. Same school, same activities, same rules, but living in the mansion added new elements to navigate. The gardens were shared space, requiring careful coordination to avoid unexpected encounters. The pool could only be used at scheduled times. Even the parking arrangement had been meticulously planned to minimize accidental meetings. Yet despite these precautions, the air seemed charged with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Owaif would catch herself listening for footsteps in the main wing, while Rowan's shadow sometimes lingered at windows overlooking the garden where the children played. Their first unplanned encounter happened in the garden on a Sunday afternoon. Owaif was helping the children plant a small vegetable garden, another attempt to maintain normalcy in their new surroundings, when Rowan emerged from the main house. "Oh," he stopped short, clearly not expecting to find them there. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize—" "Mr. Goldsmith," Aurora called out, waving with dirt-covered hands, "look at our tomato plants." Rowan's face lit up at being directly addressed by his daughter for the first time. "They look very promising," he said, careful to maintain an appropriate distance. "Do you like gardening?" Mama says growing things teaches patience, Atlas informed him seriously, and responsibility. Your mother is very wise, Rowan replied, his eyes meeting Eoif's briefly before dropping away. Archer, always the observer, studied him intently. You have hair like ours, she noted. The innocent observation sent a jolt through both adults. Eoif quickly stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. We should finish up here. It's almost time for piano practice. Rowan took the hint and retreated, but not before Eoif saw the pain in his eyes. These moments, these little revelations of connection, were both wonderful and terrible for him. The weeks passed, establishing new patterns. The children gradually grew accustomed to seeing Rowan around the property, though he was careful to maintain the role of friendly landlord. He attended their school events, sitting quietly in the back, his presence both conspicuous and carefully distanced. The hardest times were the evenings, when the children were asleep and the big house grew quiet. Eoif would sometimes stand at her window, looking out at the gardens where she and Rowan had once planned their future. Occasionally she'd see lights on in his study, his silhouette visible as he worked late into the night. One such evening, unable to sleep, she wandered into their private kitchen for tea. Through the window, she could see Rowan in the garden, sitting alone on a bench they'd chosen together years ago. He was holding something. It took her a moment to recognize one of Aurora's piano recital programs, dropped earlier that day. The sight stirred something in her chest. Not the old pain, but something new and complicated. He was trying, she had to admit, following their agreement to the letter, never pushing, always careful of boundaries. But she could see what it cost him to be so close to his children, yet unable to claim them. Their carefully orchestrated dance of avoidance was tested again during a thunderstorm that sent all three children running to Eoif's room in terror. As she comforted them, a power outage plunged the mansion into darkness. I'll check the circuit breakers, she heard Rowan's voice call from the main wing. We have flashlights in the kitchen, she called back automatically, then froze. It was the first time they'd spoken directly in weeks. He appeared in their doorway moments later, flashlight in hand, then stopped short at the sight of all four of them huddled on Eoif's bed. The scene, his family, his children seeking comfort from their mother, seemed to physically affect him. The backup generator should kick in soon, he said softly, his voice rough. There are extra batteries in the main kitchen if you need them. We're okay, Eoif replied, equally quiet. Thank you. The children watched this exchange with curious eyes, sensing undercurrents they couldn't quite understand. Another crash of thunder made them jump, and before anyone could react, Atlas asked, Mr. Goldsmith, would you tell us a story? Mama says stories help make scary things less scary. The request, so innocent and natural, hung in the air between the adults. Rowan looked at Eoif, clearly unwilling to overstep, but desperately wanting to accept the invitation. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded slightly. One story, she said. Until the power comes back. Rowan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. His voice, when he began speaking, was slightly shaky. Did you know that thunder is actually the sound of clouds bumping into each other while they dance? The story he wove was magical, clouds having parties in the sky, lightning as their camera flashes, thunder as their musical accompaniment. The children gradually relaxed, their fears forgotten as they were drawn into the tale. Eoif found herself equally captivated, remembering how his storytelling had been one of the things she'd first fallen in love with. When the power returned, Rowan finished his story and stood to leave. Thank you, Mr. Goldsmith, Aurora said sleepily. You tell good stories. Thank you for letting me share one with you, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. At the door, he paused and looked back at the scene he was leaving, his family together but not his, safe but not his to protect. After that night, something shifted subtly in the mansion's atmosphere. The children began to wave to Rowan when they saw him, sometimes calling out to share small triumphs or observations. He remained careful not to overstep, but his presence became less awkward, more natural. Oafer watched these interactions with mixed emotions. She could see how good he was with them, how naturally they responded to him, but she also saw the toll it took on him to maintain distance, to not reach out and embrace them, to not tell them who he really was. The arrangement was hardest on Rowan during celebrations. The children's 6th birthday party was held in the garden, and though he was invited as Mr. Goldsmith, watching from the periphery as his children opened presents and blew out candles clearly tested his resolve. Later that evening, after the party, Oafer found a small package outside each child's door. Inside were precisely chosen gifts that spoke of careful observation, sheet music for Aurora's favorite songs, a book about constellations for Atlas, and professional-grade colored pencils for Archer. No extravagance, no showing off, just thoughtful presents from a family friend. Months passed this way, each day a careful ballet of coordinated movements and maintained distances. The children thrived in their new environment, their natural talents flourishing with access to better resources. Aurora's piano playing improved dramatically with daily practice on the grand piano. Atlas's interest in astronomy grew with his new telescope. Archer's art became more sophisticated with proper materials and space to create. But living in such close proximity began to wear on the adults. Every shared space held memories, every casual encounter sparked with unresolved tension. They communicated primarily through notes and texts, planning their movements like generals coordinating troops to avoid battles. One afternoon, our wife overheard the children discussing their unusual living arrangement. "Why does Mr. Goldsmith look at us like that?" Aurora asked her siblings as they did homework in their study room. "Like what?" Atlas looked up from his science book. "Like he's sad and happy at the same time," Archer supplied, not looking up from her drawing. "Maybe he's lonely," Atlas suggested. "This is a big house for one person." "Maybe he misses his family," Archer added softly, her intuitive nature cutting close to the truth. A weef slipped away before they could notice her, her heart heavy. The children were too perceptive not to notice the undercurrents, too intelligent not to question the strange dynamics of their living situation. That evening she sent Rowan a text. "We need to talk about timing. They're starting to ask questions." His reply came quickly. "Whatever you think is best. You know them better than anyone." The response, so different from the controlling man she'd known, gave her pause. Perhaps people could change. Perhaps pain and regret could teach lessons that happiness never could. As she watched the children get ready for bed that night, Oif thought about the complexity of their situation. These 3 precious beings, created from love before it turned bitter, now living in a house divided by past hurts, but united by their presence. The compass necklace she still wore seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, as if pointing toward a decision that needed to be made. The current arrangement, carefully structured though it was, couldn't last forever. Something would have to change. But for now, they maintained their delicate dance, separate lives intersecting at carefully choreographed points, held together by 3 children who unknowingly bridged the gap between past and present, between love and hurt, between what was lost and what might still be found. Chapter 10. Breaking Point. The revelation came on an ordinary Tuesday evening, delivered by Rowan's head of security in a manila envelope that would shatter what remained of his carefully constructed walls. The surveillance report on Jade Monroe, his former mistress, detailed years of corporate espionage, carefully orchestrated manipulation, and breathtaking betrayal. "She's been selling company secrets to our competitors for years," Harrison explained quietly, standing in Rowan's study. Even during your relationship, she was using your trust against you. Rowan sat at his desk, the same desk where he'd once signed divorce papers ending his marriage to Aifa, and felt the bitter irony of it all. He had thrown away a diamond for what had turned out to be cut glass, and even that had been false. "The evidence is conclusive?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Harrison never brought him incomplete information. "Absolutely, sir. We have records of payments, copies of leaked documents, everything. She was quite thorough in documenting her success." Success. The word echoed in Rowan's mind as he thought about all his supposed successes. His business empire, built on ruthless determination, his reputation as a brilliant strategist, his ability to spot value and seize opportunities, yet he had failed to see the true worth of what he'd had with Aifa until it was far too late. Through the window of his study, he could see lights on in the east wing. It was astronomy night. He knew from the carefully maintained schedule that Atlas would be at his telescope, probably with his sisters nearby, all of them learning about the stars under Aoif's patient guidance. "Sir?" Harrison's voice brought him back to the moment. "What would you like us to do about Ms. Monroe?" "Handle it legally," Rowan replied, his voice distant. "Full prosecution, no settlements, no deals. She wanted to steal from me. Let her face the consequences." But as Harrison left, Rowan knew the business betrayal wasn't what was really tearing him apart. It was the stark reminder of how badly he'd misjudged everything that mattered. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the same brand he'd been drinking the night he'd said those unforgivable words, "to off." Walking to the window, he watched as a small figure appeared at Atlas's window. His son's golden hair caught the lamplight as he bent over his telescope, and even from this distance, Rowan could see his expression of intense concentration, so like his own. The sound of piano music drifted across the garden. Aurora practicing, her dedication evident in the repeated phrases as she worked to perfect a difficult passage. He had heard her playing this piece at her last recital, sitting in the back row as agreed, his heart swelling with pride he had no right to express. Movement in another window caught his eye, Archer at her easel, working late as she often did when inspiration struck. Her artistic talent amazed him. Just last week, one of her drawings had won a school competition. He'd been there, of course, watching from his designated distance as she accepted her award with quiet dignity that reminded him so much of her mother. The scotch burned his throat as he took another sip, but it couldn't burn away the growing ache in his chest. He had everything he'd ever worked for, wealth, power, success, and none of it meant anything compared to what he'd thrown away. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Aifa, in the jewelry store that first day, talking about diamonds with such passion and understanding. "Everything valuable has a story," she had said. "The best ones are still being written." What story had he written? A tale of pride and foolishness, of treasures discarded and miracles missed. He had called her barren, worthless, when all along she had been carrying the most precious gifts imaginable. The piano music stopped, and through the window he could see Aurora running to show something to her mother. Aifa's face lit up with pride and love as she examined whatever her daughter was presenting. The sight hit him like a physical blow. All these moments, these precious daily interactions, lost to him because of his own cruelty. The Scotch glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor in a spray of amber liquid and crystal shards. The sound seemed to break something inside him as well, and for the first time in years, Rowan Goldsmith began to cry. They weren't quiet, dignified tears. They were harsh, racking sobs that bent him double, forcing him to his knees among the broken glass. Years of suppressed emotion poured out of him, grief for the time lost with his children, regret for the love he'd destroyed, shame for the man he'd become. "Papa, why are you crying?" The small voice startled him so badly he almost fell. Aurora stood in the doorway of his study, her sheet music clutched to her chest, looking at him with concerned eyes. Eifer's eyes. "I?" He couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She had never called him that before, had never been told to call him that. How did she know? "You look like the man in Mama's old pictures," she continued, taking a small step forward. "The ones she keeps in her special box. And you have hair like ours, and when you smile, you look like Atlas and—" "Aurora." Oif's voice, sharp with panic, came from the hallway. She appeared behind their daughter, her face pale. "You know you're not supposed to be in this wing. Come back now." But Aurora, with the directness of childhood, wasn't so easily deterred. "Mama, is Mr. Goldsmith our father? Is that why he's sad all the time?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 5 years of secrets and pain. Rowan remained frozen on his knees, tears still streaming down his face, unable to look away from his daughter's questioning gaze. "Aurora, please go back to our wing," Oif said quietly. "We'll talk about this later. But Mama, now, sweetheart, please." Aurora reluctantly obeyed, but not before giving Rowan one last look, a look that seemed to contain both question and answer, accusation and forgiveness. When she was gone, Oif stepped into the study, carefully avoiding the broken glass. Her eyes took in the scene, the scattered papers about Jade's betrayal, the spilled scotch, Rowan on his knees crying like a lost child. "You're bleeding," she said finally, noticing the cuts on his hands from the broken glass. "I deserve to bleed," he whispered. "I deserve so much worse." Oif was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Stay there. Don't move." She left and returned moments later with a first aid kit. Of course, she would know where everything was kept, even in this wing she never visited. Kneeling beside him, careful of the glass, she began cleaning his cuts with the same gentle efficiency she used when tending their children's scrapes and bruises. The familiar scent of her, vanilla and something uniquely Oifa, made his tears fall faster. "I was so wrong," he managed between sobs. "So stupid, so cruel. I had everything that mattered, and I threw it away because I couldn't see past my own pride. Rowan, no, please, let me say this." He looked up at her, not caring how broken he appeared. "I didn't deserve you. I didn't deserve them. I still don't, but seeing them every day, watching you with them, knowing what I missed, it's killing me, Aifa. And now this thing with Jade, finding out that even that was a lie, I can't." "Breathe," she instructed softly, the way she did when one of the children was upset. "Just breathe." They sat there in silence for several minutes, surrounded by broken glass, while Rowan's breathing slowly steadied. Oifi finished bandaging his hands, her touch clinical but not unkind. "Aurora's too clever for her own good sometimes," she said finally. "She's been piecing things together for a while now. The others probably have too, in their own ways." "What do we do?" "What we should have done from the start," Oif replied, standing up. "We tell them the truth, but not tonight, and not like this. Get yourself together, Rowan. They deserve better than a father they find crying in the dark." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "And Rowan, next time you feel like breaking something, remember that our children live here now. They don't need to see their father falling apart. Our children." The words hit him like a physical blow. She'd never referred to them that way before. Always my children, never ours. After she left, Rowan slowly got to his feet. His hands stung from the cuts, but the pain felt right somehow, a small penance for larger sins. Walking to the window, he could see Aoife returning to the east wing, where 3 small figures waited anxiously by the door. He watched as she gathered them close, no doubt beginning the difficult conversation about what Aurora had seen and discovered. Even from this distance, he could see the love and protection in her posture, the way she created a safe space for their questions and confusion. Looking around his study, at all the symbols of his success, the awards, the photographs with business leaders, the evidence of wealth and power, Rowan felt a deep sense of shame. None of it mattered compared to what was happening in that other wing, where a mother's love had created something far more valuable than anything he had ever achieved. The compass pendant he'd given Aoife caught the light as she turned to lead the children inside, and Rowan remembered its significance, a guide home when lost. He had been so lost for so long, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a path back to what mattered. First, though, he had to become the kind of man worthy of being their father, the kind of man who faced his mistakes and learned from them, the kind of man Aoife had once believed he could be. Looking down at his bandaged hands, Rowan made a silent vow. He would earn this second chance, not through money or power or grand gestures, but through patience, understanding, and genuine change. He would learn to be the father his children deserved, even if it took the rest of his life. Outside, the stars Atlas loved so much began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the east wing, Aurora's piano music resumed, more subdued now, but still beautiful. And in the gentle night air, Rowan Goldsmith began the long process of rebuilding himself into someone worthy of the treasures he had almost lost forever. Chapter 11. Healing Hearts. The morning after Rowan's breakdown dawned clear and crisp, a new day that would mark the beginning of their healing journey. Aoife had spent most of the night with the children, answering their questions as honestly as she could while being mindful of their young hearts. "Is that why Mr. Goldsmith, Papa, looks at us like that?" Atlas had asked, his intelligent eyes full of understanding beyond his years. "Because he missed us." "Yes, sweetheart," Aoife had replied, holding all 3 of them close. "He missed you very much." "But why didn't he find us before?" Aurora demanded, always the one to ask the hard questions. "Why didn't he want us?" Archer, quiet as always, had simply watched her mother's face, reading the emotions there with her uncanny perception. Now, as Aoife prepared breakfast in their kitchen, she could hear the children whispering among themselves, processing this revelation in their own ways. The sound of footsteps in the main wing told her Rowan was awake too, probably as sleepless as she had been. A soft knock at their connecting door made all 4 of them freeze. It was the first time Rowan had approached their wing directly since they'd moved in. "May I come in?" His voice was rough with emotion. I think we all need to talk." Aoife looked at the children, seeing their mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What do you think?" she asked them, determined to let them have a say in this moment. Aurora, brave as always, nodded first. Atlas and Archer followed their sister's lead, though Archer moved closer to Aoife's side. "Come in," Aoife called softly. Rowan entered carefully, as if afraid to disturb the morning peace. He had clearly made an effort to pull himself together. Gone was the broken man from last night, replaced by someone trying very hard to be worthy of this moment. "I brought something," he said, holding up an old photo album, if you'd like to see it." The children exchanged glances, then Aurora patted the empty space on their breakfast nook bench. "We're having pancakes," she announced. "Mama makes them in shapes sometimes." "She always has," Rowan said softly, sitting down and placing the album on the table. "She used to make them for me, too, long ago." This simple acknowledgement of their shared past seemed to break some of the tension. Atlas leaned forward, curious about the album, while Archer studied Rowan's bandaged hands from her safe position beside Awif. "You're hurt," she observed quietly. "I was careless," Rowan replied honestly. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt themselves and others. I've made many mistakes, but my biggest one was not being there for you three." "Show us the pictures," Atlas asked, changing the subject with childish directness. Rowan opened the album carefully. The first photo showed him and Aofe on their first date, at the Irish restaurant where everything had begun. "This is how I met your mother," he began, his voice gentle. "She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and she knew more about precious stones than anyone." The morning unfolded around the photo album, pancakes growing cold as the children absorbed their parents' story. Rowan was careful to keep things age-appropriate, focusing on the love and joy rather than the pain that had followed. Aoife found herself adding details occasionally, helping to paint a picture of the happiness that had preceded the sorrow. "And this was our wedding day," Rowan said, turning to a page that showed them standing in the cathedral, both glowing with joy. "Your mother wore diamonds in her dress that caught the light like stars. Like my necklace." Aurora touched the delicate pendant she wore, a birthday gift from Mr. Goldsmith that now held new meaning. "Exactly like that," Rowan smiled. "You have your mother's eye for beautiful things." The conversation gradually moved from the past to the present, the children asking increasingly direct questions as their comfort grew. "Can we call you Papa now?" Atlas wanted to know. "Instead of Mr. Goldsmith?" "I would be honored," Rowan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But only if you want to, and only when you're ready." Archer, who had been quiet throughout most of the morning, finally spoke up. "Why were you crying last night?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Rowan met Aoife's eyes briefly before answering. "Because I realized how much I had missed," he said carefully. "How many precious moments I didn't get to share. Your first words, your first steps, your first day of school. I was sad because I couldn't be there for those moments, and happy because I get to be here now if you'll let me. Like when I feel happy and sad about finishing a good book," Atlas suggested. "Exactly like that," Rowan smiled, touched by his son's attempt to understand. The morning stretched into afternoon as they began the delicate process of rebuilding their family bonds. Rowan showed them more photos, told them stories about their grandparents who would need to be told about this development soon, and answered their endless questions with patience and honesty. "Would you like to see something special?" he asked finally when the photo album was finished. "Something that belongs to all of us." The children nodded eagerly, and even Aoife found herself curious. Rowan led them through the main wing, the first time they had properly entered his space, to a room they had never seen. Inside was a museum-quality display of precious stones and minerals, but arranged in a way that was both educational and child-friendly. "This is the Goldsmith collection," he explained, kneeling down to their level. "Your grandfather started it, and I added to it over the years. These stones tell our family's story, just like the photos do." He showed them different specimens, explaining each one's significance. The children were fascinated, especially when he pointed out stones that had come from mines they had studied in school. "And this," he said finally, approaching a special display case, "is the most precious stone in the collection." Inside was a stunning blue diamond, identical to the one he had proposed to Aoife years ago. The children gasped at its beauty, while Aoife felt her heart skip a beat. "It's the same color as the one in Mama's memory box," Archer observed, her artist's eye catching the similarity. "Yes," Rowan agreed softly, "because they're a matched pair. Very rare, very special, like the love that brought you three into the world." The afternoon continued with more discoveries, more questions, more small steps toward understanding. The children began to relax around Rowan, their natural curiosity overcoming their initial hesitation. Aurora wanted to show him her latest piano piece. Atlas had questions about the mines where the specimens came from. Archer, still quiet but warming up, asked if she could draw some of the stones for her art project. Watching them interact, Oifa felt something shift in her heart. The pain wasn't gone, might never be completely gone, but seeing Rowan with their children, witnessing his genuine effort to connect with them on their level, started to heal wounds she had thought would always remain raw. That evening, as they prepared for bed in their own wing, the children were full of excitement and questions about their newly acknowledged father. "Can Papa come to my next recital?" Aurora asked as Oifa tucked her in. "And sit in the front this time?" "We'll see," Oifa smiled, touched by her daughter's quick acceptance. "One day at a time, remember?" "I like how he explains things," Atlas commented from his bed. "Like you do, Mama, making it interesting instead of just facts." Archer, last to be tucked in as always, asked the question Oifa had been dreading. "Are you and Papa going to love each other again?" "Oh, sweetheart." Oifa smoothed her daughter's curls. "It's complicated, but what matters is that we both love you three very much, and we're going to work together to be the best parents we can be." After the children were asleep, Oifa found herself in their small garden, looking up at the stars. The compass necklace felt warm against her skin, as if responding to the day's events. "Thank you," Rowan's voice came softly from behind her, "for giving me this chance, for handling it so beautifully with them." "They deserve to know their father," she replied, not turning around, "and you're proving yourself worthy of knowing them." "I know I can never make up for the time lost," he said, staying respectfully distant. "But I want to be part of their future, in whatever way you think is best." "They're asking about coming to your wing now," she informed him, "about showing you their achievements, sharing their interests." "Only when you're comfortable with it," he assured her quickly. "We can maintain whatever boundaries you think are necessary." Finally turning to face him, Oifa studied the man who had once been her everything. He looked different now, humbled, more real somehow. The arrogance that had driven them apart was gone, replaced by something more genuine. "One day at a time," she said, echoing her words to Aurora. "We'll figure it out together, for their sake." "For their sake," he agreed, though something in his eyes suggested he hoped for more. As they stood there under the stars, separate but connected by the three sleeping children nearby, both felt the first real stirrings of hope. Not for what was lost, that could never be reclaimed, but for something new, something built on stronger foundations of understanding and humility. The healing had begun, not just for the children discovering their father, but for two people who had lost their way and were finally finding a path back, if not to each other, then at least to a peace they could share. Chapter 12. Golden Anniversary. A Love Reborn. 1 year after the truth had been revealed to the children, the Goldsmith Mansion's gardens were once again transformed for a celebration. But this time, it wasn't the ostentatious display of their first wedding. Instead, the space had been decorated with simple elegance. Fairy lights twinkling in the trees, golden roses mixed with wildflowers, and 3 special helpers who had insisted on being involved in every detail. "The roses have to be arranged just so," Aurora directed the florists, channeling her father's attention to detail. "They represent Mama and Papa's second chance." Atlas had calculated the perfect placement of lights to create what he called optimal romantic ambience, while Archer had designed the invitations herself, incorporating subtle symbols of their family's journey: compasses, diamonds, and 3 small stars. In her dressing room in the East Wing, Oifa stood before a mirror, hardly believing the path that had led to this moment. The past year had been one of gradual healing, of rediscovery, of building something new from the foundations of what was broken. Her dress, was simpler than her first wedding gown, an elegant ivory sheath with subtle golden embroidery. No diamonds this time, except for the blue stone on her finger. The original engagement ring that Rowan had kept all these years, presented again one evening under the stars. "You look beautiful, Mamma," Archer said softly, arranging the train with an artist's eye for detail. At 7 years old, she had grown into a thoughtful young lady who observed everything with those wise eyes. "Papa's going to cry," Aurora predicted with a grin, adjusting her own junior bridesmaid dress. "He always gets emotional about you now." "That's because he learned what really matters," Atlas added sagely, looking handsome in his little suit. "Like in my astronomy books, sometimes you have to lose sight of something to understand its true value." Oif hugged all three of them close, marveling at their wisdom and acceptance. The past year had shown her a side of Rowan she'd thought lost forever, not just through his interactions with their children, but in the quiet moments they began to share. It had started with parent-teacher conferences, sitting together to discuss Aurora's musical progress, Atlas's scientific achievements, and Archer's artistic talents. Then came family dinners, initially awkward, but gradually warming into genuine connection. The walls between the wings had slowly come down, both literally and metaphorically. The proposal had come naturally, not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet moment, watching the children play in the garden. "We got it wrong the first time," Rowan had said, holding out the familiar blue diamond. "We built our marriage on spectacle and show. But these past months, seeing you with our children, falling in love with you all over again for your strength, your grace, your incredible heart, I want to build something real, something lasting." Now, as the children led her toward the garden where their second beginning awaited, Aoife remembered all the steps that had brought them here, the pain of separation, the miracle of the triplets, the years of struggle, the revelation, the healing. Each moment had shaped them into people capable of truly appreciating what they had. Rowan stood waiting beneath an arch of golden roses, looking not like the powerful businessman he was, but simply like a man in love. Their small group of guests, only close family and friends this time, watched with joy as Aurora, Atlas and Archer preceded their mother down the aisle, each carrying a symbol of their family's journey. Aurora held the compass necklace that had guided them home. Atlas carried the photo album that had helped bridge past and present. Archer held a small painting she'd created of their family, not perfect, but real and beautiful in its authenticity. When Aoife reached Rowan, he took her hands in his, and the years of separation seemed to melt away. But this wasn't the same man who had once seen her as an ornament to his success. This was someone who had learned that true value lies not in perfection, but in the willingness to grow, to heal, to love despite the scars. Their vows were different this time, not grand proclamations, but honest promises born of hard-earned wisdom. "I promise to love you not for what you can give me," Rowan began, his voice thick with emotion, "but for who you are, for your strength in raising our children alone, for your grace in giving me a second chance, for teaching me that real treasure isn't found in minds, but in moments." Aoife's vows came from a heart that had learned to trust again. "I promise to build with you a love that's stronger for having been broken and rebuilt, to remember that perfection isn't the goal, growth is, to show our children that true love can survive any storm if you're willing to weather it together." The children stood with them as they exchanged rings, new ones this time, designed by Archer with 3 small diamonds representing the miracles that had brought them back together. "By the power of love and forgiveness," the officiant declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife again." The celebration that followed was filled with joy, laughter, and the kind of genuine happiness that can only come from overcoming real challenges. The children performed a special tribute they'd prepared, Aurora on piano, Atlas narrating their family's story, and Archer creating a live painting of the celebration. Later, as they danced under the stars, Rowan held Eowulf close. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing me what real value looks like, for giving me a chance to be the man you always deserved." "Thank you," she replied, "for becoming that man." From their table, the triplets watched their parents with satisfaction. "See," Aurora said to her siblings, "sometimes fairy tales just need a little more time to get to the happy ending." "And some treasures are worth waiting for," Atlas added, wise beyond his years. Archer simply smiled, already sketching the scene before her, not a perfect portrait, but a real one, full of love and second chances, and the kind of happiness that only comes from knowing what it means to lose and find again. As the evening drew to a close, the Goldsmith family stood together under the stars that had witnessed their entire journey. They were not the same people who had begun this story. They were stronger, wiser, more appreciative of the precious gifts they had been given. Their love story wasn't perfect. It had cracks and scars and moments of deep pain. But like the strongest diamonds, it had been formed under pressure, tested by time, and emerged more valuable for having endured. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes the most precious stones are the ones that have weathered storms, that true love isn't about perfection, but about growth, and that every heart, no matter how broken, holds the capacity for healing and new beginnings. For those who witnessed their story, it became a testament to the power of forgiveness, the strength of family, and the incredible capacity of love to transform and rebuild. It reminded everyone that it's never too late for a new chapter, never too late to right wrongs, never too late to open your heart to love again. The compass necklace that had guided them home now rested in a special display case alongside their wedding rings, not as symbols of wealth or status, but as reminders of the journey that had brought them full circle, back to each other, stronger and wiser for having traveled the difficult path. And above them, the stars that Atlas loved to study twinkled like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky, bearing witness to a love story that proved that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in the glitter of first impressions, but in the quiet strength of hearts that have learned to love through adversity. For this was not just a story of lost and found, of mistakes and redemption. It was a reminder to all who heard it that love, real love, is not about perfection. It's about growing together, healing together, and building something stronger from the pieces of what was broken. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson of all. Subscribe if liked.